theatre between South and Southeast Asia in the late 19th century. This paper is to analyze different cases from the Malay world, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar with historical methods as well as from the perspective of current musical practice. Constructions of historical awareness and some nationalist or religiously motivated thoughts may play an important role in reflecting on musical skills. This practice-based research involves long-term fieldwork experiences, archival work, and interviews with key figures. This paper should help rationalize historical developments and their meaning for current performance practices in the region. The further idealization of musical dramas on stage was and is always accompanied by individuation resulting from personal encounters, accidental shifts in arrangements, and the availability of performance knowledge. The paper suggests an open minded and fearless approach to cultural globalization. Most of the music and dance practices, which were confined and popular among nobles and aristocrats in North India, became similarly popular among the upper middle class population after the political and cultural interference of British colonial administrators during the 20th century. Parsi theatre has been the best entertainment event for North Indian people of all social classes at that time. Some sources reveal that North Indian music was spread in Sri Lanka during the British period through Parsi theatre, which largely promoted Hindustani raga-based compositions. These Parsi theatre performances were imitated by Sri Lankan experts in the field by writing scripts and song in Sinhala language. The Sinhala version of Parsi theatre was named Nurti. Prior to Parsi theatre, the most popular music theatre type in Sri Lanka has been Nadagam, which has got a strong South Indian cultural background. The literature describes that Nadagam declined after the coming of Parsi theatre, which has been nurtured with North Indian music and dance practices. The dialogues were less important than the content of song in Parsi theatre scripts written by following the ghazal poetic structure which has been widely popular in North India since the second half of 19th century. Eclectic features of North Indian performing arts were included in Parsi theatre performances, where graceful and skillful song actresses and actors had inspired the Sinhala people to adopt North Indian performing arts practices. Vijayatunga commented, among others, that in particular the irresistible music of the theatre operated as an agent of intracultural seduction, and above all, the haunting airs of the music of North India. All these fascinated and captivated the onlooker. Yangon in Myanmar was under British rule at that time when Parsi theatre troupes travelled throughout the world. The most popular theatre genre in Myanmar has been Zatpue, which was widespread in the populated towns such as Yangon and Mandalay. The theatre road during the British time changed into Ziwa Ka Street, which has been once home to the last Mughal king in Delhi, Bahadur Shah Zafar. I witnessed Zafar's tomb and the mosque where I could meet the ulama who provided some information on the last poems and some information of his descendants. The last king has been a big fan of poems who wrote himself many poems in Urdu language. Even today, Qawwali troops are occasionally invited from Pakistan and North India to perform. The musicians in Yangon know too little about any Parsi theatre activities which have taken place in Myanmar. The nearly 80 years old Hawaiian guitar player Yu Ting could remember some performances he did with Indian musicians and an associated melody which he could still perform. Most significantly, the Myanmar music instruments and related music repertoires are still famous among musicians and people there, in addition to recently popularized foreign music instruments and associated pop music. The Burmese harp and drum circle are two of them. I could meet musicians who play them professionally. Interestingly, the musicians said that they have special tunings of musical intervals which are not similar to the Western tempered harmonic scales and perhaps with other types of interval systems practiced in various cultures. The melodies are usually played on drum circles, and we sometimes tune them in the middle of an ongoing music piece if we feel the tuning has to be adjusted according to our tunings. And the Burmese harp player also said the same. The Burmese piano player played piano as if the Burmese xylophone. Hansen points out that the Burmese Zatpue was much stronger in attracting the Burmese audience in urban areas. Therefore, Parsi theatre could not survive or influence aesthetic preferences of the average urban Burmese audience. Hansen assumes that Parsi theatre troupes have shared the same stages that were used by Zatpue theatre practices. The already established theatre halls have been the ideal place for Parsi theatre performances. As Hansen writes, it was home to the Jubilee Hall, a well-appointed theatre that seated nearly 800 patrons, as well as hotel ballrooms, clubs, and cabarets. Theatre, opera, ballet, and circus professionals regularly stopped in Burma on their tours out of Europe, Australia, and the United States. This terrain was also frequented by artists from India, notably the Parsi theatre companies that called around the Indian Ocean. Baliwala and his theatre company known as Victoria Company travelled to the court of King Tibu in Mandalay for theatre performances where he could make some profits. By the second half of the 19th century, there has been a much larger Indian influx who could lead to watching theatre performance in Mandalay and Yangon. Thus, Baliwala continued staging theatre in 1881, 1883, 1884, and 1885, making probably different tours to Mandalay. Parsi theatre became popular even in the Malay world during the last third of the 19th century, thus creating many imitative theatre genres such as Bangsawan in Peninsular Malaya and Comedy Istanbul in Java. Many long established cultural forms of India must have been introduced to the people in the Malay world through Parsi theatre, from which hybrid cultural activities emerged. Parsi theatre favored Hindustani music forms such as Tumri, Ghazal, Dadra, and folk songs in the performances. The literature provides some evidences for the adaptation of Hindustani Ghazal in the Malay world through Parsi theatre activities. There are a number of previous studies on the impact of Parsi theatre, namely Ghulam Sawar's theatre research papers and later Tan Sui Bing's writing about the Malayan Bangsawan. Bangsawan can be identified as one of the successors of Parsi theatre, provided that was tremendously popularized compared to other theatre genres in the Malay world deriving from Parsi theatre. As the Malay version of Parsi theatre, Bangsawan was known as Tirung Wayang Parsi in its first days. In certain areas of Southeast Asia, Parsi theatre was known as Comedy Parsi, as the term comedy stands as a generic Malay term for entertainment. The stories performed in Parsi theatre were familiar to the people in the Malay world given the vernacular translations of these stories from Urdu works were already available in the Malay world before the Parsi theatre arrived. Many following studies took up some ideas from these writings, yet without any profound addition to what is found in older literature. A living source of information is Rahman B, living in Kuala Lumpur and collecting different artifacts from his time within Bangsawan traveling troops. Rahman B reveals that he heard from early dramatists of Bangsawan that Parsi theatre is an Indian theatre that came to perform in Pulau Pinang. But a lot of people liked it because at that time there was no other entertainment. The idealization of an early urban theatre entertainment through traveling Parsi troops and the following individuation in various places of Southeast Asia is fascinating and points towards future developments. The Parsi theatre appeared in all the described contexts as a cultural channel between South and Southeast Asia. At the same time, this cultural channel was indicating a differentiation in urban music practices that took place along important trade routes and in the centers of modern power. Possibly, the speed of urbanization caused different approaches to urbanized entertainment practices, as the example of Myanmar has shown. Another interesting observation is the fragmentation takes from immigrated theatre performances, such as the example of Malay Ghazal or the application of an eclectic way in composing stage plays. These facts underline the early beginnings of globally expanding performance practices that were only later reinforced through mass media. Intense future studies may lead to a clearer picture. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Rewadee Ungpho from Prince of Songkla University, Thailand. I will talk about the Sea Gypsy mobility and the transfer of musical cultures along the Andaman coast of Thailand. First of all, I would like to introduce you to know the Sea Gypsies. Sea Gypsy is an ethnic group who now settle down mostly on the island along the Andaman coast of Thailand, Malaysia and Myanmar. The Sea Gypsy group is distinct from others with excellent skill in maritime livelihood and a nomadic way of life in the sea. In the area of the Andaman Sea, the Sea Gypsy may refer to Sabak Bajau peoples of the Philippines and Malaysia, Morcan in Thailand and Myanmar, Orang Laos in Malaysia and Indonesia, and Urak Lawoi in Thailand and Malaysia. This is a Southeast Asia map to show the area of the Sabak Bajau in Philippines and Malaysia, Orang Laos in Indonesia and Malaysia, Urak Lawoi in Malaysia and Thailand, and Morgan in Thailand and Myanmar. And this slide will show the location of the Sea Gypsy in Thailand. The Sea Gypsy in Thailand can be divided in three groups. The first one is Morgan, the second one is Morgan, and the last one is Ulak Lawoi. You see Morgan is in the upper part, and Morgan in the middle part, and Ulaklawoi in the lower part of southern Thailand, as shown in the map. According to hearsay and documentations, the music culture and performance of the Sea Gypsy are correlating with their journeys. That means the journey of the Sea Gypsy leads to cultural learning, especially of music and general performance culture. The music and performing arts of the Sea Gypsy are closely related to longing or longing, which can be found in the southern region of Thailand and also in the upper parts of Malaysia. In the meantime, the singing language of the Sea Gypsy is also related to Malay and Burmese in some parts. In addition, the music and instrument of the Morgan and Morcran group can also be related to Central Burmese music. This slide shows the Morgan instrument. In the right side, you will see the instrument named Karting. Karting is the two-string fiddle with various shapes. Sometimes you can see Karting look like the shape is look like a violin, but it has only two strings. And this instrument is the only instrument providing melody in the Morgan songs. And the left side that you see is the drum. It is also the important instrument. It's named Ramana. And this slide shows the Ulaklawoi music. You can see the left side is the dancer, is a longing dancer, and another side is the instrument, which is lamana and violin, and they also have a gong and ching and a chimbal also. Let's see the video. This one is the Ulaklawoi music from Phuket province.
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking from Shanghai, and I hope that you're interested in our topic. It fits your conference, and we want to contribute a bit beyond the area you are working about.
is named Talak Tak Tak. This Ulak Lawoi group, they sing their song with Thai language, but mostly they sing with the Ulak Lawoi language. Conclusion, I uh, try to make what is the make a three group. What is the modification in music of the Sea Gypsy in three groups. The first one is Ulak Lawoi. For the Ulak Lawoi, the first one is music and performance are used for entertainment, both in the floating ceremony and other festivals that are enhanced by environment context, such as making a votive offering, Chinese New Year, or Chinese Ancestor Day. And the second one is music and longing performance are used as part of cultural events of tourism. The third one is music and longing performance are used as part of the work. Music and performance are included in the local education curriculum, but there are also curricular practice and don't cover all areas of the Ulak Lawoi people. And for the Morgan group, there we have the number of lyrics is limited because of the oral tradition, and sometimes the song fades from the memory of the person. And the second one is cutting instrument is no future production, and no one can play this instrument anymore. And for Morgan, the first one is Morgan group. They play only the kind of longing named Tan Dũng, is longing Tan Dũng or Tan Dũng song. This one is different from longing from Ulak Lawoi. They play only Tan Dũng, longing Tan Dũng, and longing Tan Dũng is now become a part of service culture for the tourism. And the Morgan music and performance are one of the tools of social empower. For the conclusion, the modification in music and performance of the sea gypsy has changed according to the surrounding environment. In the former time, their way of life has harmony with nature, and nowadays the area of their living has become a tourist attraction. As a result, living behavior and culture change unconsciously. Then I make the project named Morgan and the Revival, the musical learning management for the sustainable preservation of the community cultural heritage. You can find this video in YouTube if you want to see more information. And this one is only, for example, only one 1 minute, and you can search in YouTube by Morgan Music.
ดนตรีของมอร์แกนเนี่ยเป็นดนตรีที่มีความเป็นวิถีเดิมเนี่ยค่อนข้างมาก
ความเป็นมาของมอร์แกนสมัยโบราณนะเขาก็หากินกับปลากับทะเลอะไรแบบนั้นทะเลเนี่ยทะเลคือไร่นาสวนของมอร์แกน
ครั้งแรกเนี่ยก็ได้ไปเยี่ยมชมเกาะเขาแล้วก็เราก็พบว่ามีชาวมอร์แกนเนี่ยที่หมู่เกาะสุรินทร์เนี่ยเขามีวัฒนธรรมดนตรีที่ยังเหลืออยู่ก็คือเป็นเพลงร้องแล้วก็มีเครื่องดนตรีอยู่อย่างหนึ่งก็คือกาติ้งเนี่ยที่ตอนที่ไปพบเนี่ยก็คือเป็นลักษณะของซอสองสายที่มีรูปร่างหลายๆรูปร่างเขาก็เรียกว่ากาติ้งนะคะก็จะเป็นเครื่องดนตรีชิ้นเดียวเลยที่เป็นเล่นเป็นเมโลดี้ในการร้องนะคะแล้วก็เพลง
Okay, thank you very much.
The publication on the picture is saved by the National Library of New Zealand. The book that looks very self-published is the travel journal of two families, the Chans and the Kongs. It traces the first movement in 1907 from Guangzhou, China, to the jungles of Borneo. It is a sixth-generational record with a second wave of movement to England, Canada, Japan, Singapore, Australia, United States, and New Zealand. In other words, Borneo was for many just a station in the generational spread of the Chinese from different areas, as it was Spain and Portugal for migrating travelers to the later United States. Chinese routes into the south are not so well known as those to the west, yet a remarkable number of Chinese settlers came to the shores of Borneo, founded cities such as Pontianak, that is now part of Indonesia, Kuching, Bintulu, Miri, and Sibu in Sarawak, Kota Kinabalu, and Sandakan in today's Sabah. That is Sabah, that is Sarawak, and that is Indonesia. It's also known as Kalimantan. And I will speak about this area and especially about this little area. However, the large island also had to be explored and tested for economic growth. So it came that Chinese settlers in the coastal area started trading and exchanging goods with inland people, among them the Land Dayak. The Land Dayak are also the roof over the Bidayu, to which the Bidayu belong, the Bidayu people. They still live in long houses or scattered community houses, and in very remote areas. Some had to be removed to lower grounds due to water regulation works and dam buildings. You see here that area I was walking through, and there the dam was built and now there is water, and we see here some traces of earlier waters. Here's a house on stilts in Semban, and that was a walking profile over 7 hours. We went down here, up and down, and then every time we thought it must be finished, but this one went on and on. I was presented the most auspicious collection of valuable items the Kampong Semban, where we traveled, had collected over the centuries. Among them were teeth of bears and tigers that roamed the area many decades ago, but also small bells with Chinese inscriptions that could be read as Xi'an or as An Si, or any other combination of these two characters, engraved in small zinc copper vessels, as you see here. Could it be indeed mean the city name of Xi'an? Does the city name stand for prosperity of the bells or of the bearer of the bells? I don't know. Or is it just ornamental or symbolic for Chinese? Xi'an is also far from the usual places of migration. We can go look back to the map. Here you see that Xi'an is actually more here in the middle of on the upper fringe. So it cannot be actually that it came from the place of origin. It must have been, therefore that's my assumption, already magic at the point of departure from China, and it was brought over as a kind of money. That is a really important thing to see, that these bells were so delicate and interesting that they were collected by these people and put together with the teeth. Another intriguing part of the treasures are joint dances and music. You see here on the left upper part, dances. While the eagle dances, which you see here in the picture, of the men are to find a victim among the women sitting around. I remembered some other treasures and objects that were shown to me. For example, this plates and bowls. You see here plates and bowls, I hope. In former times, 2 of them had a metal rim. You see here that there was a metal rim around here. And it was important to know that these metal rims are still a bit there, but not complete. They are already gone due to the times. And I think that is most oldest objects I could find there. Then there are 2 that are made of clay. They are made of clay, they are not of porcelain. And the dark stains are actually from water, maybe rainwater that was falling in there, and then it was evaporating, and this is left because other water is not that dirty. Plates are not used for what they are made. They are just objects to be kept for the community and as a communal value to have plates. It is not to eat from. The dark stains come from catching water and evaporated later. Also, the ladies with the rings, the victim dancers, you see here the ladies, they sit here in the middle. Victims dancers They wore these bracelets already for a long time, some of them from the age of 10 and onwards, depending on their parents' wealth and education. They wore them around their leg and the forearm, and they marked their personal possessions. That does not mean that everyone is that rich. Only a few families were very rich and they could afford to have these rings. The rings are made of a similar material as the bells, just using a slightly different percentage of zinc and copper, giving an expensive compound and always being cleaned through wearing. So if you wear that and you have your dress over that, it will always clean these rings, and that is important. The technology must have been from the metalworking areas south and east of the Padawan area. The Padawan area is the area south of Kuching, where I was doing this investigation. And I speak about the metal worker in central Borneo. On the Indonesian side, there was no border in the past. It was just imaginary. This border was introduced by the colonizers. On the one side, the Netherlands, on the other side, the British. So this technology to make the rings came from central Borneo, and therefore we find much more of these ring things in the central Borneo area and not on the fringes. They look rather like a money kind of tool, and if we speak about the bells, while the rings were made from another place on the same island. So the drum in the picture is the one that was created in Anarayas. It's a village not far away, also a Bidayo village, by Master Abbas, after I reported to not have found such a drum in Semban, and I thought he can make one to gift them, which was not possible later. The drum gifted to the visitors from Semban became another treasure of the community, as things can only be used when individually owned, not if the entire community is the owner. That I did not know. I only learned there. Conclusion. Learning about the fact that drums cannot be gifted to the musicians gave me an insight of how small Chinese bells could be found far from their place of original production and why they were kept for such a long time without being ever used as dance utensils or as signal tools. The way up to Semban was not meaningless, for me at least. We may ask ourselves, how many things of our presence will be one day covered by water, forgotten or rediscovered or asked for? The reason for the division of goods like the copper bells and the rings was clear. It had social reasons, and how gifts to communities and individuals were differentiated by the people living there. The music played and the dances produced only changed much later. When similar trade structures were established in the state unit of an independent Sarawak as part of the Malaysian Federation. But now I want you see here also that is one of these bridges I had to climb over. 15 meters high over the ground. It's quite high and it's scary to go over that because it only has these two tubes of bamboo and it's a bit shaky. And then there are long ways you had to go. That is a good way because it's going straight and not way up and down. And the feedback always looking like that. Now I want to show you a short video clip of how it goes in Kampong Semban.
Phản này có mình đi chặt cháu mà sân là anh em sân này cháu giúp năng lượng ở bộ cả đời ở bộ mi ma cho biết bên ngô cần một nước nhỉ sakit ini an cả năng lượng ở bộ mi ma cả đời ở bộ cả lama mà cha mà nhân ta culi.
You see that here he has no drum to beat, and that is very important for this kind of music. Therefore, I wanted to have another drum. That is a ring lady dancing. That is in the morning lecture. That was everything I had to offer. Many thanks for your attention, and I hope you had a bit enjoyment to see
We can't hear a question. Would you please repeat it? Yes. Rewadee, did you hear
Yeah.
that question?
Could you could you repeat the question again?
With the Sea Gypsy people to promote cultural heritage tourism? Is the government engaged in the tourism promotion?
Okay. Yes, thank you. We have 3 groups of the Sea Gypsy. Only Ulaklavoy, only the Sea Gypsy from Ulaklavoy, the government in Phuket. Now they try to promote the culture to be the Phuket or the province culture, but the another group such as Morgan and Morgan, now they don't have any promote from the government.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have a second question, please? Please,
Yes,
come on
thank
up.
you.
Just to kind of amplify what Rewadee was saying, I think she would agree with me, just to remind everyone that these groups cover several different countries and several different governments. So that's why her answer is focusing on the Thai government, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
My question is, could you speak a little about the content of the lyrics in the Sea Gypsy songs? Do they talk about their maritime work, their fishing, or are the subjects that they talk about different than that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The content of the song, the lyrics for the Sea Gypsy, they always talk about the life in the sea. That is a former time they are in the sea. They will talk about the bird, the Iceland. They will that they visit, and the fish. The name of the fish, something like that. Yes. What again? Only Ulaklavoy they perform for the tourism business, but now the Morgan and Morgan Morgan have a little bit for the business, but the Morgan they are in the far of the far from the Iceland is very far from the country. Then now there are Morgan is still still play the music for their life, not for the business. If I answer your question, I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Yes. This managed situation for the Sea Gypsy because it has 3 groups and they are different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. And
Thank you too.
okay, I think we're going to end the Zoom now.
Okay.
Be made by Dr. James Seth of Central Washington University. Now that's not Washington D.C., right? No, it's the other Washington. All right. Whose book, which was released earlier this week, am I correct?
On the 7th, yes.
Absolutely, on the 7th. Fantastic. Will very soon be in circulation and is sure to capture the imagination of all of us. It's entitled Maritime Musicians and Performers of Early English Voyages, the Lives of the Seafaring, listen to this, middle class. Do we think of the middle class as seafarers? I mean, maybe in yachts or something like that, but this is quite interesting now. I'm really looking forward to this, James. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome James Seth.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to take my mask off briefly so that you can hear me. And thank you again. I'm so honored to be here. This is my first time at the Connecticut Sea Music Festival, and I'm so excited. So this is actually a couple of images of gamelan music from Java, and then next to it is the Westminster tournament roll, which features John Blank, who's the first actually visualized Black Tudor musician. But all of these will be in my book as well. This presentation is actually going to be about 4 different voyages. And I'm gonna, let's see, the title up here, Jesse. I can hit the arrow. Do you need to hit the arrow? Okay, there we go, perfect. So my presentation today is gonna be, They Delight in Music Above Measure. If I can bring it back. Let's see. See if I can go back here. They delight in music above measure, bridging lingual barriers through music on 16th century English voyages. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay. So my first paragraph is going to actually be my sort of thesis of the book. Maritime musicians on 16th century English voyages were mediators and constant communicators, and this is partly why my subtitle is The Seafaring Middle Class. They were between upper officers and, I wouldn't say lowly, but certainly lower on the echelon seafarers, and sort of operating in a kind of in-between space. They would engage with captain, crew, and foreign contacts using sensory methods that were different from yelling seamen. This is part of shanty culture, and I'm going to be talking about that more in my book, but here it's a little bit different because when we think of music at sea, we think of shanties, but here I'm also going to be talking about other kinds of music, other kinds of noise and sound making that happened during these voyages. Aboard ship, there were ways of communicating and signaling based on court practices, and there were others based on shipboard practices. Shipboard musicians and signalers participated in both of these. And others adapted their method on oral and gestural communication to suit the occasion, because there were many different occasions for playing music and for giving sound. whether by orders or whether by instinct. So sometimes they were, ordered by their captain, and other times they had to sort of wing it. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss how the oral and nonverbal communication was used to establish trust and make friendly relations during these English voyages, particularly with indigenous people of Africa and the Americas. Music making, singing, yelling, dancing, and noise making were effective introductory gestures during these formative voyages in the 16th century. I'm going to be focusing on 4 different voyages. The first is John Winter's voyage to the South Sea, which actually coincided with the second voyage, at least first, which is Francis Drake's circumnavigation, the first major English world compassing voyage in 1577 through 1580. And then the third is Martin Frobisher's third Northwest Passage voyage. Of course, if you know anything about the Northwest Passage, this sort of assumed trade route through China that was never found. And the fourth is going to be John Davis's first North Passage voyage. Okay, so let's see if I can get to the second slide here. We know it's there. It exists. Okay, I'm not sure.
I might be able to just fix your slides for you if that works.
That would be perfect, Jesse. Thank you. Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, should have a feel. That's okay. There we go. So this is actually a veal from the Folger Shakespeare Library that's kept in there. So with music, noise, nonverbal communication, the English made the first steps in having what I will call kind entertainment. This is sort of a stock phrase that's used very frequently in early English voyages, and kind entertainment encompasses a great deal of different tasks. It was not just musical, it could also be trading goods, it could also be playing cards, it could be, assortment of things, even theater, which I will also talk about in the book, but more here on music. So this was a common phrase in voyaging journals. It refers to any casual or courteous diversion that was often used more often when describing interactions between the English and foreign nations and cultures. So we see this phrase a lot during diplomatic encounters. Often starting as a kind of conversation after a meal, and if you could go to the next slide actually, because it has an image, I think it's an image from a storybook with Drake. Here we go. It's a little bit more cartoony, but this is actually a representation of Drake during the circumnavigation. This is in the Great Cabin, I believe. And this is what they're doing here, is they're actually looking, there's different foreign traders that are looking at wares, and they're kind of investigating. And this is also part of what kind entertainment involves. So often starting as a kind of conversation after a meal, kind entertainment help establish bonds through the use of kind as familial or establishing a kind of kinship through cultural or lingual exchange. Kind entertainment would take many forms, as I've already said: conversations, card games, showing or trading wares, music making most prominently, and elaborate performances more generally. But what were the preparatory gestures before kind entertainment could be made? How would the English establish trust with other nations and tribes without knowing their languages? And when the English did lack translators, and so such translators for Drake would be Diego, his manservant, who is one of the few black members that were a part of Drake's sort of consort or crew. They relied on accessible and sometimes unconventional ways to show goodwill and gain trust. And if you go to the next slide on John Winter's voyage, yeah, there we go. So in addition to using gesture and sign language to communicate non-verbally with indigenous people, English voyagers and performers used music and noise making to break the ice, so to speak. Even Captain Winter himself participated in the informal introductions during the voyage in 1577. Although Winter had been voyaging alongside Drake's Peloquin, which was renamed the Golden Hind, in 1577, he lost sight of the flagship during the course and the South Sea, and decided to return back to England. So while exploring the Cape of Good Hope, which he just calls Cape Hope, rather, on May 14th, 1577, Winter met with a flyboat that the fleet had lost sight of on April 27th, and he signaled the boat to meet the crew. While bringing the flyboat into shore at Cape Hope, about 30 South African villagers gathered to where Winter's men were docked. They formed a circle near the English, armed with bows and arrows. The villagers approached the English cautiously, but they appeared welcoming, and this is from one of the journals, showing themselves very pleasant, in so much that Master Winter danced with them. This report by Edward Cliff from the voyage states that they were exceedingly delighted with the sound of the trumpet and viol. So we know from that passage alone what kind of instruments they used, what kind of performance culture was on the ship during this time. Cliff's testimony is valuable for revealing several details. So first, we know that Winter was emboldened to greet villagers and engage in a kind of introductory dance on his own. And second, that the voyage included at least one trumpeter and multiple viol players who delighted the indigenous people. The string musicians on Winter's voyage may have only played during meals at that time aboard ship, as well as for other occasions of shipboard diversion. So this particular occasion was significant because it gave them a new audience that they had not yet had, that maybe had not heard these instruments unless perhaps the Portuguese or another European country had been encountering them or had played for them. So the musicians were game to play for the African villagers during this encounter, having performed spirited music for the captain and crew to dance aboard ship. So Winter did not seek violence in this case, or at least that's not what Cliff's testimony is telling us. And yes, it's speculative. Yes, we can ask these questions. But each seeking, and these are the Keokeon tribe, that the Keokeon man beareth his bow, and through his musical introduction, he and his crew recognized that they were, quote, this is Cliff saying, much given to mirth and jollity. And I'll be talking about how we can also question that sort of gaze of are they really, jolly or happy or sort of pleasant, but at least that's the kind of idea that we're getting. Although Cliff, the voyage diarist, was put off by their eating habits and characterized them as thieving after they actually stole Winter's red cap. I guess there was a big snafu. It appears the English still made a significant impression, and they stayed at the bay to victual, which was pretty common, get water, hunt seals, etc., before they departed on June 3rd. So switching now to the other voyage that was happening at the same time, this is Drake's circumnavigation. You can move to the next slide. I'll have more interesting slides, I promise. They're not going to be all text. During Drake's circumnavigation, his musicians and crew members participated in a lively exchange of music shortly after the Golden Hind made land in South America. Drake's ships approached the coast of Brazil on April 1578, and on May 12th, he made anchor at a bay which, quote, seemed to promise a good and commodious harbor. The next day, on May 13th, Drake and others took a boat out to survey the area, as explained in the journal of Francis Fletcher, who was the chaplain on board the Golden Hind. And let's see, a boat being therefore hoisted forth, this is from Fletcher's journal, himself with some others the next morning, May 13th, rode into the bay, and being now very nigh near the shore, one of the men of the country showed himself unto him, seeming very pleasant, singing and dancing, after the noise of a rattle, which he shook in his hand, expecting earnestly his landing. So that's what Fletcher's account says. The man's, quote, very pleasant demeanor was a welcome sign for Drake and his company. The image of the man holding a rattle seems to have put Drake and his crew at considerable ease. Though rattle was a general term describing any instrument making a rattling sound, it was also known in context with the child's toy even during the early modern era. So it is at least important to note that although the passage emphasizes the joy and innocence of Drake's initial encounter with the Brazilians, the description essentially infantilizes him. But Fletcher's account also indicates that the man was expecting Drake and his landing, depicting the English as some kind of welcome guests instead of intruders. Contrarily, Drake's crew was uninvited and excited to make landfall to victual. I mean, they were more excited than the Brazilians that they described because they could, get food, water, victual, all that stuff. The English may have viewed the rattle as a kind of ceremonial instrument and not a signaling one, which was actually probably the purpose of the purpose of a rattle in this case, not to signal them, but rather to signal their own people. So anyway, the man was likely a lookout, using this instrument much like maracas in a similar manner as their horn or their fife or their drum. You can move to the next slide. So bugles, this is going to come up in an important passage here in just a second. Once the ships made land in Brazil, the English introduced themselves with pomp and gaiety, making use of certain noise-making instruments to entertain the villagers. And this is also another quote from Fletcher. The people of the country did show themselves unto us with leaping, dancing, holding up their hands, and making outcries after their manner. But being then high water, we could not go over there on foot, so they could just see them from a distance on shore. Wherefore the general caused a boat to be in readiness, and sent them things such as he thought would delight them, such as knives, bells, bugles, etc. It's great having an image. Fletcher's entry describes the reception in Brazil as overwhelmingly positive. A large group of Brazilian people cheered for Drake's arrival, prompting him to give the first elaborate gesture of diplomacy during the circumnavigation. Drake sent things that he thought would, quote, delight his native hosts, knives, bells, bugles, etc., and likely other musical instruments as well. He chose the louder instruments, but not the still instruments. You notice he didn't give them viols, perhaps because of their cost and their importance to shipboard musicians. Of course, you know, they would play every meal. Drake was very insistent on them playing at every single meal, or avoidance of any discordant sounds. Although bells and bugles were useful for signaling, Drake could risk losing them if his trumpeters still had their own instruments. The English sent the Brazilian villagers instruments like bells because they also required very little work or skill to play and made the loudest sound. Drake also sent instruments designed for naval communication, including the bugle. This was used as a naval instrument, as toys to delight, anticipating that the islanders would have a kind of childlike susceptibility to noise and spectacle, making, quote, outcries after their manner. And that's Fletcher's journal saying. Before trying to understand these outcries as language, right? This is language that we're talking about, not outcries. The English felt that this was their safest form of communication from their current distance. The exchange of music and musical instruments sets the scene as a site of cultural collaboration. Drake's musicians, who do have names, John Brewer, Simon Wood, Richard Clark, and Thomas Meeks, may have given these leaping, dancing villagers an impromptu concert, which is very much what they did during interactions with the Spanish aboard ship. The villagers were friendly, and they were not Spanish silver hoarders, so the English aimed to pacify, not plunder. In giving the Brazilians instruments, the English also attempted to make their mark. In her work on visual representations of maritime commerce, Victoria Levine, a scholar, points out that, quote, musical instruments can demonstrate the movement of cultural goods and forms from one place to another. And they can also serve as a trope for representing a particular cultural tradition. So every time the English gave something, gave an instrument, gave a gift, whatever, they were leaving their cultural footprint, and then that instrument could also be bound up or at least incorporated in whatever kind of musical tradition that they had. And you can move to the next slide, Jesse. All right, so now we're gonna move to Canada, away from Brazil. So the musicians of Martin Frobisher's third voyage in 1578 made music with the inhabitants of a space called Meta Incognita, or the unknown boundary, which was claimed for Queen Elizabeth. As the account, and this is from Hakluyt's Principal Navigations, states that, quote, Her Majesty named it very properly as Meta Incognita, as a mark and bound utterly hitherto unknown, and of course it's obviously from their perspective. The accounts at Meta Incognita are considerably less fraught than those of other descriptions of the English and the Inuit, often punctured by capture and massacre. In the Principal Navigations, there's an account detailing an exchange of vocal and instrumental music between the English and the Inuit. And you can actually, yeah, here we go. So here's the account. So on the peninsula, this was here on the peninsula of Baffin Island, right, that Frobisher's musicians participated in a cross-cultural performance of singing, dancing, and rhythmic timekeeping, which is really interesting. The Inuit shared more of their language and performed their own style of music with the English, and in response, Frobisher's musicians played for the Inuit and demonstrated how they kept time with the rhythm of their music. What transpired was a performance of shared music making and mimicry. The Inuit performers repeated back to the English their own songs and rhythms, so we have a kind of synthesis going on here. Quote, they will teach us the names of each thing in their language, and we know this because there was a whole glossary of terms, which we desire to learn and are apt to learn anything of us. They delight in music above measure. and will keep time and stroke to any tune which you shall sing, both with their head, or their voice, their head, their hand, and their feet, and will sing the same tune aptly after you. The Inuit taught the English, quote, the names of each thing, which corroborates earlier encounters. When they first arrived in Meta Incognita on Baffin Island in the first passage in 1576, the Inuit taught Frobisher's crew the names of fingers, body parts, clothing, and words like akaske, which means ship, which they likely used more often with the arrival of Europeans, go figure. On the third voyage, the English engaged with their indigenous hosts much more intimately here. The passage mentions specific musical directions, such as keeping time and stroke, which are pretty rare in voyage documents. This is kind of a rare encounter here. Frobisher's musicians used their skills to delight the Inuit, and they also witnessed their hosts using voice, head, hand, and feet to match the tone and rhythm of English songs. So we can probably ask ourselves, what kind of songs did they, we don't have that information, unfortunately, dang it. But we can kind of guess, because of course there were hymns, there were different kind of choral music, there were shanties, like there were all sorts of music and musical cultures aboard ship. So the passage mentions specific musical direction. Let's see. The musicians may have gestured the Inuit to repeat after them, conducting them like a chorus, or the Inuit would have responded to the music that they heard by repeating it and initiating a kind of echo performance, similar to a round, I would imagine, based on the description. The English often compared the Inuit and other indigenous people to animals, which, of course, that word screeching that comes up in another passage later. But they were desperate in their flight, quote unquote, sullen of nature, and ravenous in their manner of feeding. So while this passage emphasizes the musical intelligence vis-a-vis the English musicians, it still harbors comparisons to mimicking creatures. And so, of course, when I read this passage, I think, oh, well, they treated them like parrots. That's interesting. But the English also praised them, for their ability to do this. Frobisher's musicians learned the Inuit language, or at least enough to have some kind of, lingual communication. And in return, the inhabitants of Meta Incognita learned English songs and metronymic techniques. And more likely, they used their own metronymic techniques to give the English, this is the Inuit, to give the English what they wanted to hear, right? So part of this project is to also kind of figure out, okay, how do we give the Inuit more agency when we're only getting one side of the story here, right? They had their own language, they had their own musical culture. We can compare this exchange also to Drake's gifting of musical instruments in Brazil. In both instances, the English left their cultural footprint. However, Frobisher's musicians exchanged intangible gifts, right? These are language, melodies, musical methods, which could have influenced the Inuits' musical style and techniques as well, and vice versa. Had the English stayed longer, they could have even exchanged even more songs, richer in performance. It's exciting to imagine what kind of music that they would have played. Would they have sung shanties or or the ringing? Would it have been ballads or formal music? Did they perform hymns? Would they play for shipboard services? There were psalm services aboard ship. This active musical mimicry at Meta Incognita breathed some life into the prescriptive passages. If you've ever read the principal navigations, it can feel kind of dry because it's like, okay, we saw this, we did this, we located this, but these anecdotes really give you the kind of sense of what the dynamics were like between the English and other encounters with other people. So more importantly, the English musicians and the crew members had a, quote, desire to learn from the Inuit and bridge lingual barriers. Frobisher's missteps in Baffin Island, and there were many missteps, made him more cautious of these people, of the indigenous people, the Inuit. But during the musical exchange, the English finally communicated peacefully, and they did not need to capture a translator to mediate conversations. This happened during the second voyage. They captured an Inuit man named Kalicho. More on that later. Still, we should consider the broader implications of this. Frobisher was determined, he was actually there to extract gold, which there wasn't gold, but he was there to extract it anyway, and achieve these big navigational goals to get the Northwest Passage, find the China route, and then get to where he needed to go. And of course, no gold, no China route, but we do have this. We have this exchange of music and culture that's could have had a kind of ripple effect. Okay, next slide. Now on to John Davis, who was also after the Northwest Passage. Frobisher, and this is at Nuup Kangurla, which is anglicized Gilbert Sound. Frobisher brought with him the anthropological evidence. In this case, he brought an enslaved Inuk family, which includes Calicho, to justify his first passage voyage. But he ultimately failed to discover the passage and collect the mass amounts of, quote, precious golden ore that he was commissioned to find there in the first place. These failures, which also coupled with Gilbert's failed expedition in 1583, Humphrey Gilbert famously didn't reach his destination, made the prospects of finding the passage dismal at best. However, Gilbert's longtime friend John Davis, who's famous for the Davis Navigator, it's a specific tool in navigation during this time, endeavored to continue the search. Davis was not only a adept seaman, but a talented navigator as well. He commanded 2 ships, sister ships, the Sunshine and the Moonshine. They left Dartmouth on June 7th, 1585. The voyage was recorded by John Jane, who was the nephew of one of the principal financial backers of the expedition, so it's all in the family, William Sanderson. His diary offers the most descriptive accounts of how music and dance and other kinds of nonverbal communication were effective methods when the English reached Nuup Kangurla on the southwestern coast of Greenland on the Labrador Sea. This encounter between the English and indigenous people is a striking example of what critic Ian Woodfield calls, quote, techniques of musical diplomacy integral in these voyages. There were 4 musicians who also have names: James Cole, Francis Ridley, John Russell, and Robert Cornish. And as they were called musicians and not specifically trumpeters or fifes or drummers, we can guess that they probably played either stringed instruments, steel instruments, or other kinds of, perhaps multiple kinds of instruments, and not just one. The trumpeter was a naval position, the fife was a naval position, the drummer was a naval position. So as musicians, they were non-naval performers. These musicians were responsible for providing shipboard entertainment more generally. During the 4-month voyage, yes, it was pretty short, they used their talents to entertain, distract, and lure people living on the fjord of the Labrador Sea. Cole, Ridley, Russell, and Cornish also performed instrumental music to gain trust and build friendly relations. They were joined by their singing and dancing crew members. It wasn't just them, it was the entire crew. It's an incredible passage. As absurd or frivolous as the account may seem to some early scholars, because it wasn't talked about in a lot of early scholarship, it shows how certain kinds of nonverbal communication helped the English avoid potential hostility. So it was essentially a kind of survival technique. The Sunshine musicians had prepared for anything, but they used their playing skills to survive and bridge these barriers. Excuse me while I need to take a drink. On July 19th, 1585, these musicians, or the Sunshine and the Moonshine, entered a dense fog, and the next day they encountered a coast, which Jane describes as the most deformed, rocky, and mountainous land that we ever saw. This deformed land was in fact the southeast coast of Greenland. This area Davis called the Land of Desolation. On July 29th, the Sunshine sailed northwest at 64 degrees 15 minutes of latitude, and they encountered a group of islands that sailing north on the western side of Greenland, dropping anchor and searching for food, water, and wood. The English made their way to the northwestern islands on this place where they called Gilbert Sound, right? Humphrey Gilbert, the guy who couldn't make it happen, failed his voyage, so they named the whole sound after him. What a great gesture. you died so that you could have this entire piece of land named after you. So Davis and his men docked their ships at the first island, where they found clothes and furs, and it's important that they actually, I think they stole them, but they found them, and they of course the inhabitants who owned them did encounter them shortly after that. You can switch the slide. All right. Yeah, I see. Friendly relations. But the Inuit quickly discovered Davis's men, as Jane describes, loud cries and screeching sounds as the crew became surrounded. So Jane and the other Sunshine companions cried out in response, hoping to signal their location to the other crew members. The people of the country, having espied us, made a lamentable noise, we thought, with great outcries and screeching. We heard them, thought it had been the howling of wolves. At last I helloed again, and they likewise cried. Then we, perceiving where they stood, made a great noise, partly to allure them to us, and partly to warn our company of them. So it had a twofold effect here. So Jane's description of the Inuit depicts them as animals with the screeching. They thought they were wolves. The howling led them to assume that they'd been targeted by some wild animals. When the Inuit cried out, the English returned the noise to allure them, but also to warn the rest of the crew. So it's not known exactly how they made a great noise, but we do know that later passages that the musicians readily also used their instruments for these same kind of purposes. They, the musicians, Ridley, Russell, etc., they probably used their own instruments in order to get the attention of the other men. Nearly a tenth of this crew included musicians, giving the English more opportunities to communicate in different ways. When they were separated into different groups, they could have had at least one musician in each different group. One group could shout hello or halloo, while another could use a bugle, a trumpet, horn instrument, any of those. Navigating the fjord near the shore, the English left enough space between them to make a getaway also once they reached the pinnaces. So as Woodfield observes, there's a strong sense in many of these accounts of the importance of the correct management of physical area of the shoreline. They had to be really close to the shore so that they could make a quick getaway in case they were surrounded. And to ensure the distance between the forward party, which usually include the musicians, and the main force, they had to be just right. And you can switch it to the next one. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, there's one more quoted passage from this particular voyage. So following the attempt to make the signal the crewmen, the Sunshine musicians assisted in an impromptu plan to make friendly relations by playing their music with their crew, while the crew attempted to make nonverbal communication. As the Inuit approached John Jane, and the Sunshine musicians, the captain of the Moonshine of the other sister ship, William Britain, came towards them, having heard their cries. So now we've got both ships' crew members sort of converging together. And Bruton also brought additional crew members as well. So he ordered these four musicians, Cole, Ridley, Russell, and Cornish, to start playing, where Master Bruton and the master of the ship, with the others of their company, made great haste towards us, and brought our musicians with them from our ship, purposing either by force to rescue us if needed, so should require, or with courtesy to allure the people. When they came unto us, we caused our musicians to play, ourselves dancing and making many signs of friendship. So Britain's decision to bring the Sunshine musicians seems odd, but he wanted to show courtesy instead of force, and this was the surest way. This impromptu performance corresponds with other similar instances. Drake, for instance, tasked his musicians on the Peloquin/Golden Hind to play for indigenous villagers while on the circumnavigation when they saw Brazilians on the shore. Britain made his decision very quickly, suggesting that the musicians were always ready to play for whatever occasion. They had to be, right? They had to have their instruments on them, and they had to be ready. Music was an act of survival as much as it was, for entertainment. Should the English find themselves surrounded and outnumbered. So there was more than simply music that was performed as well. They made signs of friendship using kind of performative gestures, and certainly this has been talked about in more recent studies. There's a great book by Céline Carillon that talks about different forms of sort of sign and nonverbal communication between specifically the French and indigenous people, but there's a lot of that going on here too. The Inuit were likely confused by these loud, flamboyant invaders, and tried to converse with them. But their entreaties were returned by more sign language and music making. Though Jane says the crew was ready to engage by force, they were prepared. They were more prepared to party with their hosts. Ellis began to make sign language with the inhabitants using hand signals to gain their trust. This is one more passage. I don't think I've quoted it in here, but John Ellis, the master of the Moonshine, was appointed to use his best policy to gain their friendship, who stroked his breast and pointed to the sun after their order, which of course, they assume, and they assume that they have different religions and beliefs that are connected to the sun, which he then had diverse times done. They began to trust him, and one of them came on shore, to whom we threw our caps, stockings, gloves, and other such things as we had about us, playing with our music and making signs of joy and dancing. So the night and this is John Jane speaking, the diarist, we bade them farewell and went aboard our bark. So there were multiple occasions of this. Ellis's priority, gain the Inuit's trust and win their friendship and survive, make it out of there alive. To do so, he and his company had to put on a proverbial song and dance. The strategy worked, as the English were very familiar with them and avoided disaster due to their ignorance of Inuit culture and language. Perhaps it was not quite as utopian as Jane's report describes, but in any case, the English successfully established trust through goodwill instead of force or abduction. Notice that there wasn't any violent capture of any of the Inuit here. They did not do it the Frobisher way, but rather they used a kind of song and dance method. As one critic notes, the Eskimos, and this is the word he uses for them, so enjoyed the sailors dancing that 3 times as many natives showed up the next day. Word of their sociable guests quickly spread across the island, and the English put on a kind of minstrel show to demonstrate nonviolent intentions. Having established friendly relations, trading was lively between the Inuit and English thereafter. You can move to the next one. All right, so I want to talk about all of this joy that's happening and sort of temper it a little bit. Yes, yeah. Though Jane says the indigenous people were making signs of joy, we should interpret this joy within the European understanding that outward signs conveyed inner feeling. This is what Céline Carillon describes when she says, as in French reports, indigenous joy is a positive herald of future interactions, and mixed European and Indian signals are successfully put in dialogue to facilitate accommodation. Carillon draws on a similar episode from Frobisher's second voyage to discuss the positive ways that nonverbal communication achieved what the English saw as a kind of window into the emotions of the Inuit. So often, the English felt that they could understand indigenous emotion through forms of nonverbal communication. So as Carillon explains, the English not only wanted victuals, knowledge, and goodwill, but perhaps something even deeper, even something connected to a kind of emotional empathy. That these musicians and dancers were essential to gaining this understanding of the Inuit as human beings and not just people with different or sort of other sort of language and culture and religion, etc. So to the English, music and dance were the surest ways of establishing an emotional connection. I want to just, if you go to the next one, I'm just going to talk about the connections. I had a final section, but I'm just going to focus on the connections and then sort of wrap it up. So the connections between them. First, of course, musicians played in 3 of these, Winters, Frobishers, and Davises. And of these, Winters is the only account stating which instruments were played. We know that trumpet and viol certainly were. There were horns played or present during at least 2 of these, Winters and Drakes, and strings played on at least 1, which is Winters. Frobishers and Davises musicians were likely comprised of horn and string players, with possible inclusions of percussion and woodwind players as well. Indigenous people played with or for the English on at least 2 of these occasions, Drake and Frobisher's voyages, and they may have joined in the dancing and music making on Davis's as well. Gifts were given on 2 voyages. Drake sent the Brazilians the bugles that I pointed to earlier and the noisemakers, while Davis's and Ellis's gave caps, stockings, and gloves, which are proper gifts, especially if the crew had stolen the furs that they found on the island, so tit for tat. All 4 encounters involved some active nonverbal noise making, and every performance seems to have been made to prevent hostilities. Notably, 2 of the accounts included descriptions of the sea captains themselves participating in the introductions with indigenous hosts. This is huge. While both Winter and Ellis performed to gain the trust of the villagers ashore, Winter danced to the musicians' music, while Ellis used elaborate hand gestures to communicate peace. And finally, of the 4 accounts, 2 of these seem to be the most reciprocal. This was Frobisher and the Davis-Ellis one, as the musicians engaged in a shared appreciation of the music and dance. The Northwest Passage musicians did not merely entertain, as Winter's musicians did for the South African coastal villagers, nor did they simply send their instruments or return signals. They imitated, performed, taught, and learned from their hosts. Frobisher's musicians in Meta Incognita demonstrated musical rhythms and songs, and the Inuit quickly learned to repeat them with their own voice, head, hand, and feet. These interactions were the building blocks of nonverbal communication before the English could ever speak the villagers' quote-unquote hollow language. Okay, and you can move to the very end. So, not the next one. The one after that one. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm just gonna, there's my bibliography if you want to know, if you can read all of the things. Yeah, so I do have just like one quick Actually, no. If I was smart, I'd actually have an image of my book that I just published this week. But I'm really happy to hear your questions, and thank you so much for inviting me here. Thank you so much. You're going to just stay here for questions? Stay here? Okay.
So we have some questions in the audience. Oh,
I need a coffee.
ladies first.
Yes, hi.
The Inuit, whether the lasting long-term implications of this in the music, in the language.
Okay, so that's partially something that I'm very invested in and sort of tracing this. The problem is we don't have their side of the story. And what I would like to of course, be able to do with enough research money, I suppose, is to, actually do more on-hand archival research and actually find out if there was any mention of this. There's a passage that I mentioned, there are some passages where the English sort of translate what they believe are the Inuit music, but that's lacking, and I don't get that from the voyage passages that I've read. So as far as like how to trace that and what kind of impact that made, it requires a lot of research. I would just say that the short of it is it's going to require a lot of research money, maybe a couple of NEH grants. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there any record of what the top piece making tunes would have been in 1585?
Record of the what?
The music played by the English musicians.
Oh, so there's actually not a recording of, or there's actually not a mention of the specific. So here's the thing. There were victual suppliers, and there were people who were integral to the ship in providing like certain materials. And I know this because I've done a lot of research on the East India Company's third voyage, which could have included a Shakespeare play. And one of the key figures in that is a victual supplier who could have brought the Hamlet folio. What we don't have from these voyages is not only a specific song, a specific title of a work, or even a person that's integral in bringing this part, but we also don't even have a sense of like if it was a fast song, a slow song. So honestly, to answer your question, I don't have that information. But what I do is I was trained in literature. I was not trained in history, so I'm kind of doing all of this sort of on my own. But like kind of figuring out how to gauge from the passages. How does it read? Does it seem like they were playing kind of fast-paced song? Does it seem like they were playing something that would engender a kind of conversation about religion? Would that have been a psalm? Would that have been something like that? So I would just say I don't know, but there's a lot of key words that can sort of lead us to different places. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think it's very exciting that we learned that music played a great deal of diplomacy on these travels around the world. I wonder if Cook actually got involved in that at all. Did you know about Cook? Did he have a band? If he had a band, he might have survived
that. I would venture to say probably. Oh, I love that. Cook is a little bit later than my field. I'm an early modernist, and so the book is really about from 16th or 15th to 16th century to the golden age of piracy. I don't go too far out of the early 1700s, but I appreciate your question, and that's definitely something that I want to look up now. I want to know. I want to know. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh.
Yeah. You mentioned that they were going down along the African coast. Were the English were a bit later? Was there a lot of contact, and were they following up on what was going on through the Spanish and Portuguese?
As far as like between the English and other contacts on the
following up, were they going to places that the others had previously, say, broken ground?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I assume you're talking about Francis Drake's voyage, the 1577. Yeah. So this was the first time that the English had made. I mean, I think they had previously attempted, but the first time that they had really made full scale, journey, and they did, model it after previous world compassing voyages. The thing was, the crew didn't even know that they were on a world compassing voyage until they were on the ship. So they thought that they were on the ship to just plunder, or actually they aimed to plunder Spanish ships, and they didn't know that they were going to be, not only going around the world, but also being a part of this sort of plundering plot as well. So I guess to answer your question, Drake likely used previous sort of models and maps to navigate this. And of course, they went all the way down the African coast, went up, they went to Java, and then came all the way around back. So, yeah, I mean, he had a clear direction, but of course, it's interesting that the crew really didn't have an idea of that until they were on the sea.
One more.
Yes, one more question.
I just wanted a quick comment. I think it's fantastic that you're doing research on this period. I mean, all of us, we sing songs from much later periods, and I've often wondered a little bit more about the 1500s. So thank you for your research.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Put this back on.
Hang on.
Oh.
This is absolutely terrific. I was really a question. There are. Notice them coming in. I told them to come in. Some maybe could come in, and some didn't. Maybe
they heard I was
some of them got a little chance. This morning's third talk will be delivered by environmental engineer Mr. Dick Holdstock. Long-time Californian. Dick is one half of the Carol. No, that's not Carol. It's Carol over there. Carol and Dick Holdstock duo. Dick hails from the English county of Kent, where much of the hops needed to produce beer are grown. This is what and there is a song hopping down in Kent, am I correct? It's true. Yes, it's a song, absolutely. I mean, known here obviously in Essex, Connecticut, right?
Yes.
Yes, by you. There you are. He has made many fine recordings of sea songs and has a new book, Again with One Voice, which he's now going to wave around. There it is. Right. I have it. He put in how many thousands of years of work on this? It was unbelievable. It was really, and a great job as well. Great book. Yeah. Dick's topic today will be songs of the 1797 strike of the British Navy. Dick Holdstock, please.
Boy, it's so much fun to be here. I didn't get here until the second Mystic Sea Festival, but I attended a lot of them in those days. After we first started, now we're starting another thing again, and it's very exciting to see that so much work has gone into this. So many people have put so much time and energy into making it happen. I want to thank you for enabling me to be here today. What's happened to me, though, since the time that I first did that is I've gotten a lot older. And I'm probably older. I'm older than Stan Hugel was on his last visit to here. Wow. Quite a bit older than Stan Hugel was. So keep that in mind when I forget something. And don't hesitate to say, you forgot, and stuff like that. Well, one of the interesting things that came out again in my book was the whole issue of the Royal Naval Strike of 1797. And I want to go through the bits and pieces of that with the songs that told us all about it. And so I'm going to sing a little bit of song as much as I possibly can, but I will put the words up here, and I hope that you will sing along with me very loudly, because it isn't like I used to be able to sing louder than everybody, but I'm not at that now. So, but you might remember how bad Stan Hugel used to be at singing. He was all over the place, wasn't he? So, well, I think I want to sort of set the stage. So we're going to move on to this is the cover of my book. This is the big. Some of you might have gone to London, right? And Hyde Park. You know, there's the place in Hyde Park where everybody gets to say what's going on. Well, that was the beginning of that. That's what this whole picture is about. And it's when British people got fed up with the idea that working class people like you and me weren't allowed to vote. So that was the whole business. And this was just the demonstration that took place in Hyde Park just before that. And that's what seeded that forever in Hyde Park. So that's all kinds of stuff in that book. It's a wonderful thing. It's being distributed all over the world. I think I've sold 4 copies so far, and it's only been a year since I put it out. Yeah. One person back there's bought one. Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah. Well, so that's where we are. So let's start with the song called the Tender's Hold, and it's the first song that I want to interest you in. It's in the key of G. So this is why we needed a strike. And the reason we needed a strike was, whilst landsmen wandered the country round, the boast, we're getting everything up there too, great. And boast the rights of freemen. Oh, view the tender lonesome hold where droops your injured seamen. Dragged by oppression's savage grasp from every dear connection. Mixed beyond trade, ever see them gas on my indigent. Blush them all, blush your pension post who wallow in profusion. For our fowl shall provide your boat to be a mad illusion. If liberty be what oh say, why are not all protected? Why is the hand of ruffian sway against seamen thus directed? Is this your power of previous rights? Is this rewarding bravery? Oh, shame to boast your time's exploits that do not tie to slavery. Mark the unions of who parade at freedom's blessing, and every hell-born war support and vindicate impressing. A time will come when things like you get baubles of creation. No more will make mankind subdue the works of devastation. Oh, thank you very much. You're all good singers. That was just 3 verses of a song titled The Tender's Hold, or The Sailor's Complaint. It tells of the growing resentment throughout the British Isles over recruitment practices and the conditions faced by British seamen in those times. The so-called House of Commons in those days was made up and elected by only landed gentry. The electorate of districts they represented were often as few as a handful of landowners, and several large cities had no representation at all. The House of Lords were all appointed by the king or inherited their seat. It was this class of oppression that ran the judicial system, which included transportation to Australia for catching a stray rabbit that was coming into your field behind your house and eating your food. British workers, who were the vast majority of British population, observed the success of their cousins in the American Revolution and were very enthusiastic about the French Revolution that also came up around that time, of course. It was in response to the French Revolution that Tom Paine, who was then in London, wrote The Rights of Man. The Rights of Man, which embodied its readership to embolden its readership to seek and achieve control of their own destiny through classless democracy. This book rapidly becomes the biggest seller since the Bible, and it was read to rapidly formed groups throughout the British Isles, as well as in France and in the Netherlands. It was a clandestine reading of the rights of man between the decks of the Royal Navy that gave sailors the courage to use power they had to get relief from the terrible situation they were in. They were certainly motivated by this anger from this age-old impressment and the newly enacted quota system, which enabled reluctant manpower from all the districts throughout Britain. British press gangs had the right to come ashore too and press men into naval service whenever they wanted. Each British county, was required. I wonder if I can do better without these glasses on. Was required to meet periodic quotas of men for the Navy. Yeah. This meant that many of the quota men had some education of at least enough to read smuggled copies of the Rights of Man between the decks of the British Navy. And that was a very significant thing. Many of the grievances of the sailors were long-standing. They ignited the strike, which could eventually erupt through the fleet. The Navy had not received a raise in pay since the reign of Charles II. Most sailors had not been paid at all for the previous 2 years. Desertions were so common that shore leave had not been granted for 2 years. Inhuman punishment, including flogging with the cat o' nine tails, were dealt out by drunken seamen, officers for the smallest offense. Crooked merchants teamed up with the corrupt Navy purses to provide short-weighted, poor quality provisions to increase their personal profits. When the war erupted with the French revolutionary government, groups from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England increasingly smuggled their way into France to request their support for weapons and power personnel to help overthrow the oppressive government of Britain. Thomas Paine had to leave England in a hurry to avoid being convicted for treason for writing the Rights of Man in the first place. Paine had escaped just in time when he was welcomed as a member of the revolutionary government, where he too advocated for French support for the unrepresented majority of the British population. Their request did not fall on deaf ears. After many false starts and delays, an enormous French armada was put together featuring Zahoch, who was in charge, the general in charge. And with them was Theobald Wolfton from Ireland, from the Irish, from Ireland. And let's see, so where was it? After many false starts and delays, an enormous French invasion fleet set sail from Brest in the bitter cold of December the 12th, 1796. The fleet consisted of 43 vessels. That's a huge armada, mind you. 17 of which were ships of the line. They had 14,450 troops and more artillery, arms, and ammunition for the Irish than Wolfton, representing the United Irishmen, could have ever hoped for. The highly successful young French general Zahoch was in charge of the expedition. General Grouchy was also on board. Wolfton sailed with the fleet on the Indomitable through the treacherous seas. This fleet got past the British blockade down the west side coast of Ireland, planning to land in Bantry Bay. The best known song of that incident is the Sean Van Vogt. And let's all kind of join together and sing that. Ah, the French are on the sea, says the Sean Van Vogt. Ah, the French are on the sea, says the Sean Van Vogt. Ah, the French are on the sea, and the Irish will be, and the Irish will decay, says the Sean Van Vogt. And what colour will they wear, says the Sean Van Vogt. And what color will they wear, says the Shandano. And what color will they wear, king, and her own immortal ring, says the Shandano. And will Lord Ireland then be free, says the Shandano. Will Lord Ireland then be free, says the Shandano. Will all Ireland shall be free from the centre to the sea, the liberty, says the Shandano. With all that help, truly the odds were good that Ireland would achieve their long sought liberty and set the example for overthrowing government of all of Britain. But it didn't work. To confuse the British naval blockade, the fleet had sailed south through a difficult storm, the difficult strait in foul weather, where they lost several vessels and thousands of men. Hoch was sailing on a ship called the Fraternité, a separate ship from that carrying Wolfe and most of the other senior officers. Hoch and several of the other vessels were blown out to the mid-Atlantic, preventing communication with the rest of the fleet and leaving General Grouchy to try to fill his shoes. Extreme weather and poor seamanship wreaked further havoc. On December the 22nd, the damaged fleet, now under Grouchy, anchored their ships and 19 vessels in Bantry Bay. There were much talk about attempting a landing during that mighty storm. Caution eventually prevailed. When Grouchy finally made the order, the fleet to sail back to Brest. Only 15 of the original 45 ships which had sailed in December returned to the port in France. Only a handful of those invasion forces, including Generals Hoch, Grouchy, and Tone, made it back alive to France. Clearly, these happenings were similar to those of the Spanish Armada to land in Britain back in 1888. They should have had a band on board, shouldn't they? Well, the French Republic, expensive venture, having lost so many men, ships, and weapons, did reduce the ardor of the French to try again. 2 months later, however, on February the 22nd, 1797, despite their losses, the French landed a small invasion force of 1,400 men under the command of Chief of Brigade William Tate. 1,400 men under the command of Chief de Brigade William Tate spoke no French at Fishguard and landed on the coast of Wales. The orders for the invasion were unclear, and few of the soldiers assigned to this expedition had received any training. That's kind of an understatement, because it turns out that most of the people that were that's all the French that landed, and then on the beach, they were all in prison in France, and this American guy by the name of Tate tried to talk them into giving him control of another advancement, and indeed he did get the job, but they just brought him over and dumped him off on the beach with 1,000 guys who didn't know what the heck they were doing, and it turned out that up on those hills a bunch of Welsh women who wore red coats and tall black hats in those days. They were all up on the hill, and they thought they were British soldiers. So they all gave up. So they didn't get very far, but it got to be a big. We could get going with all the songs that we have about that. But anyway, that's what happened. There were also 3 other French attempts to provide help to the Irish. These attempts took place after the United Irish unsuccessfully went on their way in 1778 revolution. Had unsuccessfully went on their way, had timing been better, and if British Navy were not successfully blockading the French fleet, things might have been quite different. If the Royal Navy were incapacitated at the right time, the blockade could not have kept French invasion forces from coming to support what was thought to be Britain's inevitable insurrection. Although the timing was off, a highly motivated British Navy went on strike at Spithead on April the 15th, 1797. As always happens, these things don't work if they don't have the help from the muses of Britain and Ireland and all the rest. So it was Britannia herself that was there, of course, and the genius of Ireland who played with her harp had showed up for this. So let's sing this song. It was part of, this was in the record of the trial of the British Navy for, this is one of the items was put into the record. Oh, we got to, it's really helpful to play it, to know what key you're singing in. But you have to keep track of what you do with your, what did I do with it? Ah, here it is, Under My Mask. And it's in the key of F, so that'll help us a lot, if you know that. There's quite a bit of difference between F and G. Here we are. Genius of Britain went hovering around, for she feared that her freedom was fled. But she found to her joy that she was not quite gone, but remained with the fleet spirit on. Rejoiced at the news, for the Charlotte she flew, where for freedom was headed set round. Thy yawl and the yacht and God is climbing, for Britain and freedom thy own. The free hailed the goddess with 3 hearty cheers as she stood at the Charlotte's gangway. She dropped a sad tear and she looked on the sun, who so long neglected they lay. She was led to the eastern fair freedom, but there their loyalty sat by her side. Britannia down and down, the transport of joy, and followed the hero she tried. Every ship in the throng sent a foe so bright, whom they just received with a smile. They assured that if they treated the men, they would iron. Go on, my brave boys, in the steps you will tread. Be virtue your guide and your God, and God who rules over land and the sea, and the genius of Ireland came in with her heart and traded their freedom with tears. They manned the yards to welcome her over, and every ship gave them 3 cheers. Success to the 17 united bright stars, like a little shore. Let praise echo round every shore, and fear no more. Thank you. I got to say, it's a jolly good job that you got to sing first, because I can't even read this. So as low as 15% of British sailors were volunteers, less than 15%. Quota men comprised as much as 12%. These reluctant conscripts, taken from the cities and towns all over Britain, were often educated enough to be able to read the most popular book of the time. They, like the French sailors of Brest and so forth, did enjoy the rights of man. So we're not going to go a lot more into rights of man at this point. When the sailors refused to sail from Spithead, Vice Admiral Colpoys ordered the Marines to open fire on the sailors. But the Marines refused the order in solidarity with the sailors. This time, the sailors' favorite admiral, Black Dick Howe, was sent to negotiate with the men. All the grievances were heard, including those against cruel officers. A list of approximately 75 of the most abusive officers, with Admiral Colpoys at the top, were presented to Howe. In the meantime, the fleet at Plymouth joined with the men at Portsmouth and sent delegations and petitions of support. Howe proceeded with open negotiations with the men, while they went on to Bridport, was receiving urgent messages from the Admiralty to set sail, because their intelligence had told them that the French fleet had set sail from Ireland from Brest. It was not, however, until Sunday, May the 14th, that agreement was finally reached to remove some 114 officers, and the remaining issues were resolved. The next day, a major celebration of unity in the fleet was held with Lord and Lady Howe as the guests of honor. 4 sailors had arrived in Portsmouth in this time for the celebration with Lord Howe. They had come all the way from the Nore, which is just down across the bay from where you live, isn't it, mate? Yeah, that was the Nore. And it's right at the confluence of where the River Thames and the River Medway come into the Channel of England. 20 pounds, they had gotten 20 pounds together to send them all the way down to Spithead. The visitors brought tidings from their brother seamen and assurance that they were with the men at Spithead and Plymouth in seeking redress of their grievances. 2 of the Nore delegates returned from Spithead on May the 18th to bring the news of the settlement. The papers contained the pardon were read to the delegates, and they were only greeted with jeers. The newly appointed chief spokesman of the fleet at the Nore, Richard Parker, allegedly said, "You've brought 3 pennies worth of ballads for our 20 pounds. As of Spithead, as at Spithead, a list of grievances were then put together and presented. The 8 articles in their petition included all the items that the Admiralty had refused to discuss at Spithead. Included among other things were the demands of the shore leave, the stipulation that no officer expelled from a ship for bad conduct would be returned for services on another ship, more equitable distribution of prize money, and things granted to the fleet at Spithead. All those things granted at Spithead. Their ships from the fleet at Yarmouth joined the delegations of 20 ships at the Nore in signing their petition. So we did get other elements of the British naval fleet signing up. On number 39, the Muse's friendly aid in the book was pieced together to describe how the Yarmouth fleet joined with the Nore. Their printed ballad was retained as part of the prosecution's evidence at the trial of the seamen at the Nore for treason. It took help from the Muses to put it together. Now, this is to the tune of I'll fathom the bone, and I've had a hard time fitting them all together. How does the bone? I'll fathom the bone, bring me the punch like I'll fathom them. Use is friendly game, and I must invite. Likewise, on hand that from the to right. No, it goes, and tries then I cry, I'll follow that storm. I'll depend on my favorite. I'm going to cut it a bit short. We're going to just go to drop 2 and go to 3. Then at the north, while we round their brethren he swore unto King William true, but one of my the chant of the throne, to rainbow Yo, too bad we can't sing all of the verses. You sound like a great sport. I'm trying to wrap it up now. So what I'm going to say is they didn't get away with it. They finally had to give up. And the Parker was on for trial in Maidstone. That's where the court was. They went over to Maidstone, and that's where Parker was convicted. And they decided to hang him on my birthday, June the 30th. Yeah. So I'm going to sing with you.
Same here?
Pardon?
Same here?
Pretty close. It's a lot closer than I want you to know. So I think we like to sing this last one, which is one that is sung often by people all over in the folk music community. It's called President Parker. And the tune to this one is President Parker. I don't know any other tune. Ye gods above, protect the widow, and with pity look on thee. Oh, help me out of trouble and out of all calamity. For by the death of my dear Parker, for to me has proved unkind, though doomed by law he should suffer, I couldn't erase him from my mind. I thought I saw the yellow flag flying, signal for my husband to die. A gun was fired, quiet, I hung on the yard so high. I think I saw its hand waving, bidding me this grief I suffered on my sorrow. I think we'll call it quits on that song, because I want to tell you a few more things before we break up. And that is that this heartbreaking song is the best known of all the songs of the 1797 Royal Naval Strike. It tells clearly of Anne Parker's ordeal, culminating with the exhuming of Parker's body at night and transporting him over to London, where it is out by Sheerness is where they buried him, right, almost in the sands by Sheerness, and so where we're from, and she dug him up illegally, and they put him in a cart and got him up to London, and were able to bury him in the churchyard where I wish I could see a place here, but it was in the same churchyard that the early people in the 1600s that had come to London to try to get response to their thing. And that the churchyard got bombed out during the war, and so it's not even there anymore. Yeah. So this incredible story coming at that critical time of unrest among the majority of the working class of the British Isles might have completely changed history had a few things been different. Imagine if Hawke's Armada had sailed during the naval strike and had missed the storm. This would have enabled the French to have provided the needed support to the failed Irish Revolution, which they went ahead on their own later to do, and it didn't go very far at all. Imagine if Napoleon had intervened to end the plans for supporting British insurrection, because he came into power right around that time. And then he moved the whole thing over to Egypt, got himself in trouble down there, didn't he? Years ago, Stan Hugel told us that since one of the signs that crews used when they joined the strike was to lower or strike their yardarms to keep them from going back to sea rapidly. Hence coining the phrase going on strike. And he claimed that was where the word strike came from. We do have learned, unfortunately, that there was other strikes that preceded that. We're on time, right? Don't worry, I'm going to be done. Most writers agree that another way to show a ship had joined the strike was to raise the red flag. The red flag on that ship was, and the red flag has been raised for a number of things, a number of demonstrations that I've been on over the years also. So that's it.
Terrific, Pal.
I like it.
I want you to tell these people when you first came to the Sea Music Festival in Connecticut.
Well, I didn't get to come to the first one, but the people that came to the first one, ran the first one, actually came to the festival that I was in San Francisco the year before. And there was that idea, they came back and did this one, but they did invite me to the second one. So I was actually at the second festival.
And there were 40 plus this one, 41.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here. Just wonderful. Big Holdstock. We're adjourning now so we can have some lunch. It's an old-fashioned type thing to have lunch in the middle of the day. And we're going to come back here. I think the best time for us to be here is about 10 minutes to 1. So you can all find your seats and be comfortable, etc. So recess now, back at 10 minutes to 1. Talk about the morning at all. Nothing more. What should be jealous or anything else like that. And we'll start here in this following way. Before we begin, I would like to take 30 seconds to acknowledge just a few of the people who have made the Sea Music Symposium possible. I'll work on that. First, Joseph Morneau. Right. President of the board of the Connecticut Sea Music Festival and his fellow directors. Second, the symposium coordinator, Dr. Faye Ringel. Faye, thank you very much for your hard work on the symposium and other festival projects. Third, let us also not forget that the symposium is what is mainly because, is what it is because of the reading committee, the people who sifted through the millions and millions of papers that we get every year, you know, and decided who was a 2 thumbs up and who was a 2 thumbs down. Alphabetically, they are Craig Edwards, Eric Ingmanson, David Littlefield. Has to be a mistake here. There are 2 doctors involved in this thing. Was there an automobile crash or whatever it was? Dr. Dan Milner and Dr. Faye Ringel. This afternoon's first presentation is by independent researcher and musician, Mr. Dan Lanier, a festival director and frequent sea music presenter at nearby Mystic Seaport. The title of his lecture today is A Shipwreck, a Ballad, and a Busker. And then there's the 2 dots. Remember the 2 dots? Colon. Interpreting the legacy of Antiguan Thomas Joseph. Dan learned of Antigua's rich cultural history while working there as an environmental consultant. I guarantee you, now I'm not reading anymore, I guarantee you, we will all love this presentation. Dan, please.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Faye, if you can hear me. Thanks to everybody that I managed to hoodwink and get on the program. And thank you all for showing up and hearing this little research project of mine. See if it works. Dan had the title right. Interpreting the Legacy of Antiguan Thomas Joseph. On February 8th, 1881, the 434-ton blue-nosed barkentine A.E. Botsford approached the Bermudas, 34 days from Newport, England. She was coal-laden, bound for Havana. The following evening, headed southwest and running free through a starlit but misty night, she encountered a heavy northerly gale. Captain Tolbert P. Atkinson reckoned the Botsford was about 100 miles off Barbuda and made all sail to clear the north end of the island and its perilous lee shore. At 3 a.m. on the 10th, with violent winds and a heavy sea running west-northwest, suddenly the lookout observed that they were approaching a reef displaying tremendous breakers to leeward. Before the crew could respond, the Botsford ran among the roaring surf and struck heavily on the submerged reef, snapping her backstays and carrying away some of her upper spars. As the wind drove the vessel further up onto the reef, the crew rapidly took in sail and cut away the mast to prevent her from falling on her beam ends. Supposed to advance. At dawn, as seas broke across the deck and coal spilled into the surf, the 11 souls on board could see the northeast shore of Barbuda, nearly a mile to leeward, beyond links of threatening reefs. To launch the ship's boats would be futile in such conditions. Shortly after 10 a.m., observers on shore, having spotted the wreck that morning, 3 boats and 18 men set out from Barbuda, seeking to reach the vessel through a channel to the south, whereby they could approach the wreck from the seaward side. None of the boats succeeded in reaching the vessel, but eventually each became swamped by the breakers. High seas violently dashed boats and men against the reef, and the powerful current carried some boatmen out to sea. Men that could clung to flotsam or swam ashore, but 13 lost their lives in the ordeal. After another 2 nights on board, continuously in peril of the ship disintegrating, the crew managed to assemble a catamaran by lashing 2 boats together with spars. From this more stable craft, they made lines fast to the Botsford and paid these out until they came close to the reef, where they cut the lines and availed themselves of a large wave to carry them over the reef. In this way, the 10 crew members and the boatswain's wife safely reached shore. You can see circled on the far, why isn't this advancing? Okay, you can see circled on the far right there, the low-lying island of Barbuda. It's near the northeastern limit of the Leeward Islands, just east of the Virgin Islands. Come on. Okay. Barbuda's on the top. It's about 30 miles north of Antigua, and together they form the colonial territory known as Antigua and Barbuda. You can see Barbuda has a ring of treacherous reefs around most of its coastline. The island's low profile and the absence of lighthouses made it a graveyard for many vessels. That star shows the location of the wreck. And a list of charted wrecks, if you look at it, shows that on average, wrecks occurred more than once every other year in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so ship salvaging became an important element of the local economy. In fact, the island's lease granted the lessees the rights to flotsam, jetsam, and wrecks, and undoubtedly they exploited that opportunity. Frederick Fenger, a young Bostonian yachtsman, naval architect, and writer, visited Barbuda on his honeymoon voyage through the Eastern Caribbean in 1914. He was aboard his 52-foot schooner, Gaffrig schooner, Diablesse, and he chronicled this in his 1926 book, Cruise of Diablesse. While preparing the book, Fenger obtained a copy of the following ballad text that memorialized the loss of the A.E. Botsford and the men who sought to rescue those on board. It was on the 5th of January, from Newport we set sail. Kind Providence did favor us with a pleasant English gale. To Havana, port of Cuba, our orders did run so. Until the 10th of February, no danger did we know. The bark A.E. Botsford to Barbuda she drew near. Not thinking we were close to land, no danger did we fear. Until that fatal morning, we felt the terrible shock. Oh, blessed God, it was too true. We were upon the rocks. With consternation all around, thinking no help at hand, to our surprise, we saw a boat then coming from the land. Not thinking of their danger, some 18 souls or more, of which but 5 returned again unto their native shore. Determined for to gain the ship they tried, but all in vain. 13 dear souls had left that morn, ne'er to return again. Some struggled hard for hours, till exhausted they gave way. Their souls, we pray, has gone to rest, where we hope to go some day. 2 nights and days upon the wreck, we were in great suspense, when on the 12th we got on shore, thanks to kind Providence. We hope those 13 dead and gone in heaven rest may find, and sympathize with all their friends that's left to mourn behind. Now, Fenger identified the ballad's author as a street singer and broadside seller, Thomas Joseph, poet laureate quondam of Antigua. And he briefly described this man in the words of someone who knew him. He neither identified the source of the text nor whom had known this esteemed poet. I think that's a fine example of a 19th century Anglo-American style ballad, but it might come as a surprise to some readers that this is the product of a West Indian Creole composer. It has stylistic elements redolent of many other Anglo-American maritime ballads, and it certainly exemplifies a broadside ballad. Recognizing that such ballads are a rarity in the West Indies, I was intrigued and compelled to learn more about its reputedly famous author, Thomas Joseph. In an 1898 edition of, excuse me, sorry, excuse me. Okay, here's this. Oh, this is Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly. Okay. Okay, this is Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly. It's 1898 edition. There's an article in here by a travel writer, Lillian Kelsey, and a photo of Thomas Joseph appeared in this article. And the caption of the photo said, there we go. Okay, the caption says, Thomas Joseph, poet, musician, etc. Okay. But the article didn't say anything more about him. Nothing whatsoever. It described an American tourist visit to Antigua in 1898. We'll now get a glimpse of Thomas Joseph as a street musician in Antigua's capital, the seaport of St. John's. And this is largely based on the writings of someone who knew him. I'll outline the setting in which Joseph lived and briefly characterize aspects of his cultural background. The details are scarce, so I have to infer what I can from bits of information that are available. And I'll refer to studies of West Indian history and culture to inform my interpretation. Old maps, faded images, distant echoes. These will be our guides as I show you how I have come to view Thomas Joseph in the cultural context of his homeland and its musical heritage. Just go back to that photo for a second. And you can see in this photo, Joseph appears to be a man in his early middle age. He's clad, this is 1898, he's clad in a jacket and a top hat. This is attire typical of a working class man of late 19th century St. John's. You can see that he's barefoot and his lower limbs show the disfiguring effects of advanced elephantiasis. He's sitting on a crate on the cobblestone pavement. It's this haunting image of Joseph posing with his concertina and the paucity of any explanation beyond that whetted my desire for a grasp of his character and his vocation and his place in history. Here's St. John's up in the northwest quadrant there, the entrance to the harbor. During the latter half of the 19th century, Antigua, which was the center of government for the seat of government for the Leeward Islands colony, had passed its agricultural prime. Following emancipation in 1834, the profits of sugar plantations and mills plummeted, and the island's economy progressively contracted. Barbuda, as a satellite of Antigua, suffered a similar parallel decline. A portion of its population moved to the main island over the remainder of the century. So St. John's had about 12,000 residents at the time. This is the last quarter of the 19th century. About 600 or 700 of that 12,000 were Caucasian. As the colony waned from its former glory as a leading sugar producer, the old seaport had a worn and dilapidated appearance, and its stench of open sewers. Antigua's revenues amounted to about half of its expenses at this time, the last quarter of the 19th century. Much of the port's non-white population lived in that top portion of the photo, north of the harbor, an area of about 100 acres. It was a densely populated slum known as the Point. Thomas Joseph, who was probably born around 1840 to 1850 into a Barbudan family, may have resided in this rough neighborhood along with other Barbudan immigrants. A half century after emancipation, St. John's, with about a third of the island's population, suffered growing pains as it evolved as a local center of Creole culture and commerce. A compound of economic, political, and social crises culminated at the end of the 19th century in Antigua. Oppression, frustration, unrest had plagued the preceding decades as people of African descent had struggled without success to achieve an elusive freedom and a measure of self-governance. Substantial poverty and vacancy were evident. St. John's had a class stratification that consisted of a shrinking white plantocracy at the top, a big lower class, and in the middle, wedged in the middle, a predominantly non-white middle class. This relatively small middle class, comprised largely of merchants and clerks, had undergone sudden expansion following emancipation, but by the end of the 19th century, it had nearly vanished. It had failed to grow and had become progressively disenfranchised by the upper class, which feared and thwarted its progress. In its place, a new non-white middle class arose, which was composed chiefly of artisans, formerly lower class people. They'd sort of moved up into the middle class, and also of the offspring of white immigrants and native Antiguan mothers. Immediately south of the Point, that green area there, I'm going to discuss, that's Market Street. This is the commercial district where the local colonial government offices were located as well. Here, some of the colony's non-English immigrants, including Irish, Scots, and Madeiran Portuguese, found employment, chiefly as merchants. That green street is called Scotch Row. Along the section of Market Street known as Scotch Row, this is a photo of it, Scottish businessmen such as William Forrest set up shop. Forrest, who had arrived in 1869, had become a major importer and retailer in St. John's. That's the block where his store was located, Forrest and Company. Some advertisements of his business. I want you to remember the name Willie Forrest. Remember the name Forrest. Okay, just file that away. The papers of Frederick Fenger, this is the yachtsman and naval architect who took the cruise. The papers of Frederick Fenger reside at Mystic Seaport Museum's library. Recently, following the death of his son, just a few years ago, Christian Fenger, who lived in Old Saybrook, this collection at Mystic received additional items that included the letters of Chester Eliphalet Jackson, 1845 to 1930, of Ovid, Michigan. Jackson had taken an interest in Fenger's first book, which was called Alone in the Caribbean, and he initiated an enthusiastic correspondence with Fenger during the 1920s. Farm boy Chet Jackson grew up in rural Racine, Wisconsin. He enjoyed an adventurous youth exploring parts of the postbellum South and the tropics. Eventually, he got an appointment as the United States consul to the Leeward Islands colony from 1878 to 1891. He married and raised a couple of daughters in St. John's. Much of his responsibilities addressed the official needs of American merchant seamen within his multi-island jurisdiction, but he engaged heartily in the local community. Jackson was Fenger's unnamed source for the wreck of the A.E. Botsford. There he is in his uniform. Okay. Written descriptions of Thomas Joseph appear to exist almost exclusively in the letters that Jackson wrote to Fenger in the 1920s, which contained Jackson's recollections of St. John's. Fortunately, Jackson was an avid observer of the people and activities around him as he partook of the daily life of the seaport. He shared his memories and keepsakes of his sojourn in letters to Fenger over 3 decades later. Jackson loved music. He was a singer. And he had a good ear for the audio environment of his Antiguan home, St. John's. His reminiscences give us a delightful taste of St. John's soundscape during the late 1870s and 80s. The consul would awake sometimes to a powerful chorus of shantymen. The darky drovermen at Antigua were bursting with shanties, especially the chaps from Barbuda. Some of them had surpassing voices. Damn it, I used to lie in bed in old Antigua and hear a bunch of wharf boys starting in half a dozen blocks away, along in the small hours, coming down, hauling a shanty on trucks to the old Blow the Man Down, or Johnny's Gone Away, or Come Along, or We Are Off for Baltimore. And here they come, around the corner. How heavy they bear on the chorus. The windows fairly rattle as with a missile shock or earthquake. There are 40, if a man. The chills fly up and down my spine as though Seuss's band were passing. Not a jarring note, but one great swell of harmony, and so filling. And now it's fading, and then coming back, but still farther away and gone. These songs of maritime labor seemed ubiquitous during Jackson's years in the old seaport. A hogshead of sugar, if it rolled, had to listen to a shanty in its honor. Nearly every movement on the island was accompanied by a shanty, wrote Jackson. At the market, the town crier, ringing his bell, would bellow out notices and advertisements above the noisy bickering of bystanders and the chatter of the hucksters, the female vendors. At the end of the workday, as Jackson recalled vividly, old John the Whistler held court near the landing wharf, where, perched atop an old cannon, he whistled popular melodies like Listen to the Mockingbird, fueled by tots of rum courtesy of a nearby shop. Jackson painted the street scene for us. Crowds swayed and bickered, and the concertina squeaked, the tom-tom boomed, and the great sugar carts rumbled past. But John the Whistler, like Casabianca, stood to his post on the old cannon till the 80 proof had paid for itself. Does anyone recognize the reference to Casabianca?
The boy stood on the burn.
That's it, okay. I know at least a couple of people that knew. I checked. Here's a better picture of the photo from Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly. The concertina player was Thomas Joseph, whom Jackson described as black as the ace of spades, or the pot bottom, a most aggravated case of elephantiasis, and master of the concertina in so much as to block traffic, almost, when he took his stand on corners and recited the homemade, covering all phases from tragic to pathetic, and with a voice of a bassoon up to the lascivious pleasing of a lute, Thomas swayed crowds and sold his heart's own for a black penny a copy. With this portrait of Joseph, Jackson introduced the wreck of the A.E. Botsford and went on to explain to Fenger, when I came across the enclosed doggerel, old Barbuda came to me so forcibly that I had to write. I noticed that Thomas Joseph, Antigua's poet laureate, hasn't placed his name there too. And why for? At any rate, Bigfoot Joseph wrote it up, and being a Barbudian by birth, he has put his whole soul into it, if not his elephantiasis. By the way, the incident that the wreck of the A.E. Botsford described was really a great tragedy for a place like Barbuda. About 700 people on that little island at the time, and to lose 13 able-bodied men in a single day through acts of extraordinary altruism and bravery was really a shock, and it left a grim void, I'm sure, in many lives. There were 11 widows, and there was a relief effort. So we have to imagine, as Jackson was pointing out, the pathos with which he would have delivered this song. Antigua and Barbuda have had a lot of disasters and acts of God. This what you see here is Fenger's transcription of something he received from Jackson. It's another tragic composition by Thomas Joseph. It's called The Fatal Accident, a 17-stanza elegiac ballad that recounts the death of a young man killed in a blasting accident, rock blasting construction in 1888. Jackson praised the bard's compelling verse describing the effects of the explosion, writing to Fenger, "Note the tragic in the verse where the stones flew up into his face and knocked his knee pans out of place. Doesn't that beat anything in Homer?" Jackson effused his heartfelt admiration for the man he dubbed the sweet singer of Antigua. "I wish you had met the author of the great lyric. Oh, Thomas Joseph, I miss you, and miss you greatly. Your sleepy old St. John's fairly rocked with your double-barreled concertina and steamboat voice." Now, a word about West Indian culture. West Indian composition and performance of narrative folk ballads is a rarity. The paucity of evidence is probably a result in part of the scarcity of opportunities or opportunities taken to document such practices. But there are a few discussions. They're mostly 20th century accounts, as far as I know. And I've got to move along, so I won't spend a lot of time. But there's Martha Beckwith in 1920 in Jamaica, documented English ballad singers among Creole communities. Roger Abrams, many of you know Roger Abrams, documented 20th century child ballad performance in West Indian communities. And Jamaican folk music scholar Olive Lewin, also in the 20th century, identified broadside singers actually in Jamaica, sold broadsides. A particularly striking analog of Thomas Joseph was the West Indian Creole balladeer Charles Walters, circa 1900 to 1958, whose work Roger Abrams documented posthumously. And Walters hailed from Nevis, which is a neighboring island of Antigua, close ties to Antigua. And Walters was blind, so he had a health deficit that limited his occupational choices, just as Joseph did with his elephantiasis. But Walters made his living as an itinerant broadside composer, purveyor, and performer. And his compositions included at least one tragic maritime ballad, The Sinking of the Crown. Roger Abrams has written a lot about the expressive modes of West Indian Creole culture, Creole communities, principally based on his observations of male speakers and performers. A quintessential thesis of his work centers on a dichotomy of speech modes, expressive styles of speech, a high variety and a low variety. The high variety is essentially standard English, and it's associated with the values of home and family and respectability. The low variety belongs to the street, the crossroads, male society. It's concerned with male reputation. Creole culture placed a high value on both types of speech, high and low. And the culture had prescribed settings, culturally prescribed settings and social conventions that governed acceptable speech behavior. This is a phenomenon known by ethnolinguists as diglossia or heteroglossia, two languages. So in contrast, the low variety of speech is what some older West Indians will call broken English, even today, if you speak to them, broken English, that's sort of apologetic. This is the street speech, okay? It's the speech of laboring men, fellows on the street corner. It's relatively unrestrained. It's like trash talk, okay? And it might seem very offensive and disrespectful to the outsider. The appropriate settings for the high variety of speech were usually weddings, wakes, special occasions like that, where you would have prepared speeches. You might present hymns, literary recitations, and that kind of thing. Chester Jackson mimics remarks of some anonymous listener in the street upon hearing Joseph begin to broadcast his news story of the day, who exclaimed, "Hey, what Thomas Joseph, lifty voice now, another story." Another story. Examples of Joseph's narrative songs have survived because Jackson purchased the broadsides. But we don't know to what extent his ballads achieved currency in local oral tradition. So far, other than Fenger's book, we have no evidence of transfer to secondary print media. So as broadsides sold on the street or as solo performances, these compositions were delivered news to an urban audience. But perhaps they didn't resonate within the Creole community far beyond the immediate time and place of their performance. His work served its immediate purposes, but perhaps they didn't constitute an enduring source of entertainment in the community. I believe that his texts are remarkable, but what's more conspicuous is really what's absent, which does not appear to have survived in a tangible form that we can infer from Jackson's descriptions and Joseph's cultural milieu. The prevailing secular Antiguan musical form during Joseph's time was Benna, with African roots in the traditions of griots. These are West African professional minstrels. Benna emerged post-emancipation as a way to communicate news and opinions. And as such, it shared its heritage with similar traditions in other islands. We have Banja in Barbados, Mento in Jamaica, Carrizo in Trinidad, all similar types of things. Broadly, these are call and response songs, extemporaneous songs. Benna typically featured a brief core lyric, a simple melody, and then in performance, lively delivery, repetition, and variation. Benna singers used Antiguan Creole, that is the vernacular low variety of speech of the crossroads and street. Historically, Benna had used metaphorical verse, concealed language, to conceal meaning from white plantation overseers. As a satirical device, it became an instrument of social control and a symbolic means of asserting superiority over its subject being namely the one who had committed some transgression or misdemeanor. It's a genre characterized by innuendo, bawdiness, double entendre, principally concerned with gossip and exposure of bad behavior. Since the mid-20th century, Antiguans have recognized Benna as their national music, a direct ancestor of modern calypso. An Antiguan proverb advises, "Plant and sucker follow the root," which simply points out that successive generations reflect their hereditary traits, a little bit like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's self-evident, but it may apply to the evolution of musical genres too. Benna gained ascendancy over other types of secular music, including adopted forms like narrative balladry. In form, function, and practice as an expressive medium, Benna and its cognates throughout the West Indies have persisted and evolved. As Creole musical forms that bear the marks of their African roots, these varieties thrived in post-emancipation society. So certainly, there are West African precedents for professional narrative singing, but within the West Indian Creole tradition, the adopted Anglo-American ballad format ultimately did not compete successfully with Benna's popularity. In their adaptivity and resilience, Benna's form and style proved better suited to the expressive functions of the emerging Creole culture, wherever it first flourished. Benna relied on no fixed narrative, but it could use exciting, extemporaneous wordplay, frequent musical variation, and interactive performance to achieve its ends being entertainment, commentary, social control, etc. Chester Jackson understood Thomas Joseph's talents and business, as he explained. Thomas dealt in vital things, but a bit of a scandal was a boss moneymaker. Nobody too high nor too low escaped him. It were only rich. Here, Jackson referred to the financial rewards to be gained through the lurid, sensational style journalism of effective Benna singing. Jackson had characterized Joseph's ability to command an audience on the street corner so as nearly to stop traffic. And these observations indicated that Joseph possessed considerable skill as a professional entertainer. The island tradition of tea meetings would have provided a rigorous training ground for such proficiency. Tea meetings, did I mention tea meetings earlier, tent meetings? Okay, these were the settings in which people would exhibit their oratory skills. They were usually fundraising events. They were sometimes held out in a tent, and you would give recitations. You might sing a hymn or recite something from literature. And so you were using the high variety of speech. So this was a place to cultivate oratory excellence and proficiency. The island tradition of tea meetings would have provided a rigorous training ground for this proficiency, since these were competitive performance events intended to raise money, and their audiences rewarded excellence, but responded mercilessly to mediocrity. And I mean mercilessly. Here's a later photo of Thomas Joseph. This one is taken in 1908 by a professional photographer, José Anjou, who was a Portuguese consul to the Leeward Islands colony. He made it into a postcard. The caption identifies the subject as, you can barely make it out up there, but it says in the upper left-hand corner, the famous Thomas Joseph. Here we see another facet of Joseph's musical presence in St. John's. He's wearing a vegetative headpiece, and he's got a hand-lettered signboard. We'll see these a little bit closer later. These indicate he was participating in old-time Christmas festivities. This image places him within a classic Creole performance context. At the time of this photo, the Antiguan Christmas festival, it's a bit like Carnival on other islands these days. It featured masquerades, what they call mas, caroling, mumming, stilt-walking jumbies, and other dramatic activity conducted by roving groups, itinerant groups, who did this again for donations for money. Pageantry with concertina, accompaniment, fife and drum, and so forth. It was a time of license, okay, where you could have both high and low speech varieties. Joseph appears to have used sprigs of a local plant. It looks to me like it might be papaya as adornment. And that headdress suggests that of a mummer playing perhaps even a character such as Father Christmas. You see his concertina there, and it's typical of Anglo-concertinas, typical diatonic Anglo-concertinas of the day. Here's the hand-lettered sign, and it's partially visible, but it appears to say something like the Great Christmas Ramble, and perhaps identify somebody having the appellation Boss of Pleasure, maybe Joseph. Now, histories that discuss the origin of modern Antiguan calypso and soca music invariably trace their early development back to this fellow as an ancestral figure. He's a colorful, rum-guzzling fellow named John Quarku Thomas. As had Joseph during his generation, Quarku sold printed broadsides of his compositions in St. John's. This is in the 1940s and 50s. He performed with a guitar. He had a local printer as his patron, and he hung out by the courthouse so he could get good stories and he served as the town crier, did a lot of things, advertising sales and other events for a fee. Quarku's pen has related crimes and misdemeanors, sexual affairs, often with scandalous, racy, and sarcastic lyrics. After his conviction and a 6-month sentence for singing about a young woman who became pregnant at the local Moravian seminary, history favored Quarku above his predecessor, obviously a very notorious guy, 6 months for singing. And he eclipsed his musical forebear, the famous Thomas Joseph, as Joseph faded from living memory. And it seems that the two personages became conflated to an extent so that Joseph faded from memory, but everybody remembers Quarku. Joseph was kind of consigned to obscurity. Quarku gained local recognition as an innovator in the art of Bena. He certainly advanced the genre professionally, diversifying its topical content. He sang about the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. He sang about food shortages, the rising cost of living. And in this way, he helped prepare the ground in which commercial Antiguan music would flourish in the second half of the 20th century. So, you may ask, what about the Benas of Thomas Joseph? Certainly, such songs would have contributed to the ephemeral fame that he enjoyed in St. John's, but his use of the genre may nearly have escaped us in a form that we could ascribe directly to Joseph. The National Archives of Antigua and Barbuda contain but a single reference to our subject. Thomas Joseph's Benna. Man mongoose, dog know your ways. Man mongoose, dog know your ways. Mongoose go in a forest kitchen, teep out one of a big fat chicken, put him down in the waistcoat pocket. Man mongoose. Do you remember the name I asked you to remember? Willie Forrest, okay, the Scottish storekeeper during Joseph's time there. This song called out a petty theft by some local miscreant who's known, at least for the purposes of the song, as Mongoose. Okay, everybody has a nickname in the West Indies. Within a few years of Joseph's passing in the early 20th century, commercial recordings of Sly Mongoose began to appear in various versions, vocal and instrumental, by Caribbean and expatriate performers. It was a very popular early calypso song. It became widespread and famous, eventually gracing recordings by Louis Armstrong, Benny Goodman, Charlie Parker. Okay, steel bands played it, and a great many calypsonians recorded it. Virtually every Antiguan school child of a generation, earlier generation, learned Sly Mongoose. How many people have heard Sly Mongoose? Yeah, okay, it's a familiar song. You could write an entire paper, if not a book, on the song Sly Mongoose. Charlie Parker. This is just a few. I mean, there's a lot. When Chester Jackson returned to Antigua in 1921 as a vacationer, he perceived a change in the atmosphere of the old St. John's he had known, and he waxed nostalgic. He lamented the absence of what he called real characters, such as those he had known during his service there. He heard less bickering in the streets. Gone were old John the Whistler and other memorable personalities of the public square. Especially, he bemoaned the passing of Joseph, remarking wistfully, "Poor Thomas, I hear his voice now, and I missed him sorely in my return after better than 30 years. Thomas liked plain rum for his'n." The spirited and musical sounds that had filled U.S. Consul Jackson's days on the streets of St. John's were the accompaniment of commerce. The dawn chorus of shanties, the aggressive banter of hucksters, the town crier, Thomas Joseph's steamboat voice delivering the news, all these concern the movement and the exchange of things of value. Essentially a journalistic endeavor, Joseph's compositions and performances moved hearts and quenched a thirst for the amusing and for the sensational. True to the innovative and enterprising spirit that West Indian islanders often exhibit, Joseph produced and sold his pieces on the urban street corner, and through this act of entrepreneurship, he foreshadowed the rise of the Caribbean commercial music industry. Seems that Joseph himself became commoditized too toward the end of his fleeting celebrity. We have these photographic images, first in a tourist article, and this one on a postcard. This is the tourist article. The other one was a postcard. It made him into a sort of a curio, a depiction of what foreign customers might have regarded as an exotic West Indian character. In the early 20th century, commercial West Indian music in its myriad forms and derivatives would begin to take the world by storm, with Trinidad leading the charge. And in doing so, it would undergo remarkable syncretism as it combined diverse elements from many parts of the Caribbean and beyond. Within a decade of Joseph's passing, through commercial gramophone recordings, increased inter-island exchanges, and the irresistible diffusion of jazz throughout the world, this commercial island music progressively metamorphosed into global commodities, mediated in remote market centers like London and New York. These popular music forms satisfied a demand in the West Indian diaspora and responded to a growing external taste for novel and exotic music of the islands more generally. As colonies died and new ethnic and national identities grew, the Caribbean popular music that we now know began to emerge at the twilight of the 19th century in urban centers like St. John's. Born of plantation songs, songs of newsworthy sensation, joyous and witty songs, this young music, grown from deep African roots, gave voice to West Indian hearts, minds, and souls. Joseph's songs responded compassionately to calamities of people that were compelled to put themselves in positions of mortal danger. Later songs decried more insidious tragedies of social injustice. And as always, audiences love songs that gleefully expose peccadillos of those who might engage in questionable behavior. The island marketplace represented a nursery in which new varieties of music thrived, nourished by the enterprise of individual singers who formed the vanguard of professional Caribbean entertainment, which has become a global export. So, my quest to know more about a local maritime ballads author has enhanced our appreciation of Caribbean popular music. Had Jackson not seen merit in Thomas Joseph's work and preserved a bit of his legacy, nor shared it with Fenger, who saw fit to publish Wreck of the A.E. Botsford, we would know far less of this obscure but remarkable street musician. We may celebrate Thomas Joseph now as representing a link in the chain that connects the past and present of Antiguan popular music. Sir MacLean Emanuel, known as King Shortshirt, a preeminent Antiguan calypsonian, followed closely on the footsteps of Benesinger Quarku, the guy you saw on the last slide. Experts have credited King Shortshirt with commercially popularizing Bena and transforming it into Antigua's brand of calypso. His work has promoted elements of political awareness and social justice on multiple levels. And Shortshirt represents a generation of musical artists who have played key roles in the emerging expression of the emerging West Indian national and regional identities. He won the Calypso King title 15 times between 1964 and 1992. Now, in his 80th year, King Shortshirt will become an Antiguan national hero in 2022. We may trace his artistic and professional lineage back to the likes of Thomas Joseph, who perhaps in his own time might have achieved formal recognition and a title had the means existed to bestow it, of Poet Laureate of Antigua and Barbuda. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Night and day are catching hell. People think I'm doing well just because I sing a few calypso. But that is my misery. Calypso don't make money, but most of them don't know that I have my axe to grind, just like any other man, existing in poverty and this giant ghetto lamb. But I intend to hang on. Tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice. I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me. No way, they go have to beat me. They go have to eat me, or the heads go roll. Tell them I say I was born in this land. I go die in this land. Nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me, lad. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Me mama must yam. Me papa must yam. Me woman must yam. Me piggy must yam. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody.
Bravo.
Fantastic. Great stuff. We'd like to have some Q&A. It has to be very quick, 5 minutes at the very, very most. So it has been brought to my attention by a number of people who quietly told me that if you're out there and you speak, that it doesn't get on the master tape of what's being done here. So if you would like to ask a question, come and get in the line, and then you can stand here and ask the question of this guy right here. Is that okay? Yes.
Or you can repeat the question from the stand. Much easier.
Just have the speaker repeat the question.
I'll repeat the question. I'm 77 years old. I think it's a lot better if you ask the question. Great idea. When I get to be your age, I'll do it your way. Okay, so let's go. Big boss line right here. Come on.
I don't think
No questions?
No questions, right?
You've answered every question. Amazing. Come and stand right here.
I've got a quick
No.
question.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
not necessarily central, but
Yeah,
you used
right.
the word post-emancipation several times.
Yeah.
And remind me whether the emancipation occurred concurrently in the U.S.
No, emancipation in Antigua was actually unique. It happened in 1834, and it happened like flipping a switch. In most of the Caribbean, there was a period of sort of indentured servitude. But they just said, okay, you're free. So when I say the middle class suddenly expanded, well, the people that had previously been emancipated, obviously they were sort of living middle class lives relatively. But all of a sudden, everybody was emancipated and all hell broke loose. You know?
Anyone else? Another question, please. Yeah, come on over here. We're both nice guys. Just right.
So is Thomas Joseph remembered and revered or studied now?
There was one reference to Thomas Joseph in the National Archives, and I read it to you. It's the song.
So there's no revival or?
No, until I don't know, last January when I started corresponding with people in Antigua. Nobody knew anything about him. They knew all about Corfu, you know, from the 1940s and 50s, but Thomas Joseph. No.
I suppose that the issue with him is that he died before the age of recording.
Or about that time, yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
could have been turned around the other way.
Records don't last very long in that kind of environment. As people
Yes.
work in museums.
Another question? One more. One more? No more.
Okay.
That's great. 10-minute break for everything that's necessary, and then we will start here again at precisely 2 o'clock. Is that right? Is that what it's called? It's the incident. And there's the topic.
You will be able to hear David's voice, although unfortunately you're not able to see him this morning. But you'll be able to hear him, and he's here live.
Right.
But we'll be able to see his slides, and we'll be able to hear his voice.
Absolutely. Our second afternoon presenter is Mr. David Peloquin, who will speak to us about one of the very finest singers of maritime songs, the late and truly great Gateshead, County Durham born Lou Killen, known during his lifetime both as Louis and Louisa Joe. Dave is a former Mystic Seaport shantyman as well. Dave, a former Mystic Seaport shantyman, is well known in his own right as a singer-instrumentalist. Let's start. All about Lou.
David, whenever you're ready.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Yes. I am. Okay. Oh, good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd have worn my tie. I didn't know that Dan Lanier was going to wear a tie because I certainly would have worn my favorite tie, but I didn't. I want to congratulate, first of all, the Phoenix Rising team, I call them, the Maritime Music and Tradition Society, newly formed, which has saved the Sea Music Festival. So congratulations to all of you who participated in that. Thank you, Faye Ringel, for finding me. I was sort of lost in the woods of Maine and Windsor, a loose fish, and you reeled me in. So here I am. I also want to thank Celeste Bernardo, a good friend and someone who shared with me some of her thoughts about doing this program about Louisa Jo Killen. And so I thank her for that. And to AJ Wright for taking time. We had a long discussion on future ideas and possibilities for the festival. And that was a lot of fun. And finally, I'd like to thank my daughter, Kim, for permission to use a remembrance, share with you a remembrance of gratitude for Louisa Jo. And I'll share passages of that near the end of the talk. So this paper is a celebration, it's a remembrance, and it's a meditation. We're celebrating the revival of the Sea Music Festival. It's a remembrance of one of the very finest singers in our tradition, Louisa Killen. And it's a meditation on the nature of singing and the Bardic interpretation and what I call the Dreamtide consciousness. Dreamtide consciousness, and I'll discuss that shortly. You can take the slide down now if you like, Jesse. That's a nice slide. I do like that. Golly, you possess only what cannot be lost in a shipwreck. You possess only what cannot be lost in a shipwreck. The setting of the actual location of the sea music, as we know it, has been lost, and we might call that a shipwreck. During the last year, a dedicated and able-bodied crew has come together to rescue the festival and, more importantly, the living consciousness of that 40-year tradition, because this is about embodiment. And there's Louisa Jo, and she certainly embodied everything we're going to be talking about. Al-Ghazali's wisdom reminds us that we still possess and can never lose our deep respect for this music and our commitment to preserve, celebrate, and participate in a tradition that is old singers that we know. They were called Kavi, K-A-V-I, and they reported that their songs were not composed, but that they were shurti, which is a Sanskrit word that means overheard. They listened in meditation to the oceanic consciousness, what Bardic singing art is about. This is a quote from Joseph Campbell I want to share with you. Campbell summarizes this insight succinctly in the following. Are you there, Jess?
Yeah.
Number 3. There we go, Vishnu. In the honor of glory of whaling ends with a humorous intimation that Ishmael is a whale rider rather than the god Vishnu, who is the preserver of the world, who dives to the bottom of the sea to save the Hindu Vedas. And hold on one second, there we go. The sacred books containing the song poems that are necessary for a new creation, or as Campbell would say, a new cosmogonic cycle. So we have a picture here of Vishnu, who is incarnated as a fish in this time, 9 incarnations. And what Vishnu is holding in his hands are the songs that are rescued from the bottom of the sea to renew the time. Melville had not only found this obscure Hindu story of timeless renewal of the world, he also intuited the sublime teaching of the symbolic meaning of the rescue of the sacred hymns. That is, that in every time, in every epoch, poetry and interpreting the timeless song that is necessary to renew the world. All right, so let's move to the next slide, slide number 4. Jesse, moving right along. Dreamtide is a phrase that shows up in a song that Archie Fisher sang, The Coolins of Home. I'm going to unpack it a little bit. I've sort of borrowed it from him. It's older than his version of it. And I'm saying that the dreamtide consciousness I'm talking about is a flow of dreamlike images that unfold in suspended time. And I'll explain that as I go along. The line from the Archie Fisher song is, while here in my dream tide, I'm hearing hill waters, the laughter of streams by the coolins of home. Again, as Joseph Campbell gives it, a state of consciousness in which the ears of all have opened to the song of the universe. The thing that I've learned from teaching meditation for I don't know how many years now is that very, very, very often, what is most important to a student are things that they feel they've almost overheard in a dream, in a waking dream, or in a dream as they're going to sleep, or even sort of in the daytime when an image might appear that gives them a clue of something deeper than just what their mind is thinking of. And so that's one of the senses of dreamtime that I'm using here. As I was struggling with this to try to explain it, I came up with dreamtide, what happens between time and the timeless. And finally, I settled on this one, which I think is the most poetic. Dreamtide, what happens between the rise and fall of the sea. Between the rise and fall of the sea. This is poetry. Seamus Heaney, one of the great Irish poets of the last 100 years, was intimately engaged with this subtle sensibility of what can lie elusively hidden between the words in a great poem. A quote from Heaney on this insight. You could put the slide up number, if you like, Jesse. It's number 6, if you've got it. James Heaney is a absolutely wonderful poet, and he's not there. That's all right. Nope. Next one, I think. There we go. Secret between words. Poetry of any power is always deeper than its declared meaning. The secret between words, the binding element, is often a psychic force that is elusive, archaic, and only half apprehended by the maker and the audience. This is pretty intense stuff, but this is the kind of thing that when you look back on the long history of ballad singers and people who are singing the songs of the people or the songs of the hymns of the Vedas, there's an intense inner connection to it that is very difficult to describe. And that's part of what I'm trying to do, because I think that Louisa Jo Killen was one of those rare people who truly embodied this. We could say that the true Bardic singer's power is always deeper than can be spoken through words of the song, deeper than the story itself even. And so we come to the key point, which is that a sublime immersion of the true Bardic singer in dreamtide state of consciousness can evoke a dreamtide reverie in the listener. Everyone out there that I'm speaking to, either online or sitting in that room, has been moved at some point, certainly by any number of wonderful singers singing possibly a particular song that moved you personally. It got inside of you. It came from the heart of the singer and somehow penetrated into your heart. And this is the kind of consciousness I'm talking about. This isn't just a discussion about literature and about singing styles. So we could say that a sublime ballad like The Flying Cloud deserves a sublime singer, and we certainly got one. My experience is that Louisa Jo Killen was able to enchant an audience with what I'm referring to as this Bardic dreamtide. She was able to sing from that secret place between the words. That's what it feels like, certainly what it feels like to me. She was able to sing from that secret place between the words, between time and timeless, and between the rise and fall of the sea. For over 3,000 years, we hear of the feminine muse or the goddess in her various forms as the mistress of the moon, of the waters, the giver of visions, to the singing bard. The tide belongs to her, as does the ship and the sea and the songs of the water. And that, just as a sidebar, the feminine presence in Moby Dick, which some people complain about because there's no women in Moby Dick, it's those elements. She is the sea. She is the manifestation. She is the inspiration, and she is the fates, and the ship itself. It's marvelous stuff. So Killen seems to have had the gift of being able to rest naturally in such a visionary state, especially when her singing mesmerized an audience in long ballads like The Flying Cloud, or touched them with delicacy in a song like All Things Are Quite Silent. In her 1965 recording on Ballads and Broadsides, which if you do not have a copy of that, it has been republished by Topic, and you must have it. 1965, her first full album, we hear her sing the love song, The Cock. Her voice on this version of the song is intimate, and the words whispered so sweetly that we get a glimpse of a woman's voice that she might have wished for in later life as Louisa Jo, which we know that she did wish for such a voice when she became Louisa Jo Killen. But if you listen to that cut on this particular album, Ballads and Broadsides, you will hear such a sweet voice. I remember the first time that I heard that recording, and I was just mesmerized by the sweetness of it. And I think I was getting a little glimpse of her with that. All right. Let's put the slide up back again. It's number 2, Jesse. There we go. Louisa Jo Killen. I have chosen one sublime singer in order to discuss a few of the essentials of the art of bardic interpretation that apply to all serious singers of traditional music and poets of the sea. She was considered by her peers, and certainly by most of the people who I'm speaking to be a singer's singer. Killen exemplified the tradition embodying bardic singers, the universal, timeless song sung from your inner being. And I mean this when I say this, I now tend to make a humble attempt to say in a few words something about Killen's interpretive singing style, which she often supported with her spare concertina accompaniment. I approach this with trepidation, because what can you say about the most, for me anyway, personally, the most moving and mysteriously beautiful and haunting voice in my experience as a singer, but I'm going to try. The following passage are from an article by Peter Wood. Many of you probably know he's a fine time on Jim McGeehan's album, this one, of Ships and Men. I'm very proud to have a copy of that. It's not too easy to find. So he was one of the singers supporting Jim McGeehan on that. Pete was a founding member of the Keelers. Some of you probably know that group. I have collected many quotes from many different sources, but I finally realized that Peter Wood's analysis was the most compelling that any that I could find, and his words resonated to my own personal sensibilities. So I've chosen to quote from his article at length. Here is Peter Wood in his words from an article in the Living Tradition magazine. It's issue 47, March 2002, and you can find it online. It's easy to find. And this is a long quote, starting now. After McCall and Lloyd, Louis Killen was probably the first to listen to source singers like Sam Larner and Harry Cox. He listened carefully, and he heard the way a note at a given point moved around, adding texture. That it was important to parse a line according to the story to keep the interest in the story dynamic. That every word counted and had to have a proportionate emphasis. And that you keep and hold on to that last word of the voice, not tailing it off. If you haven't listened to Louis' early ones, pick one up and just start listening. You'll notice that he always has that wonderful long tail on the end of it. My name is William Hollander, as you shall understand. And you almost have to listen carefully enough, especially in the old recordings, but because the early topic recordings, the recording wasn't that as good as it is now, but it's in there. You have to put a pair of earphones on. He slides out of each one of them, and his pauses are beautiful. I've got a version of Flying Cloud on this album, which is 7 minutes and 15 seconds long. How many of you have dared to sing Flying Cloud and sing in a version that goes that slowly? As far as I know, that's the one. And he never loses you for a second. Okay, so back to our friend Peter Wood. He is gifted with a voice which naturally swoops and soars, which had been trained in church choirs in his youth. His breathing is magnificent, something you need when you reach for the levels of expression he brings to a song. But he also has an attitude and respect for the tradition, which brooks no compromise. His singing shows the passion he feels for the song. Listen to The Wind That Shakes the Barley for an exemplar of how to extract the maximum out of both word and song. That could hold true for so many of the recordings of Louis Killen, and certainly in person. Again, with Peter Wood. I suppose the culmination of what Louis had to offer as an artist is on show in The Rose in June, a song of almost biblical sweep, so suited to his skills that it might have been written by him, as apparently many people believe. I sometimes feel as a community we are too reticent, accepting, quote, our place in the performing arts. But a folk song's importance is social, and historical terms should not obscure the fact that many renditions reach the highest points of human artistic endeavor. I'll read that again. That many renditions of these songs that we love so much, sung by people like Louis Killen, reach the highest point of human artistic endeavor. They are sublime. They are sublime. End quote. No, wait a minute. Yes, that's it. Okay, so that's Peter Wood. I had some ideas of my own that I tried to describe, and I found so many different things, but his was so inclusive and seemed to unfold so well that I decided to use it. It's just one man's take on Louisa Joe, but I think that he did a really good job on touching on some of the important points. So there's another thing that I want to mention that's online, and this is really quite wonderful if you haven't discovered it. It's a BBC interview. Louis Killen, BBC interview with David Paul Jones, 1991. David Paul Jones, 1991. It's 56, 57 minutes long. And it's wonderful. What I've done is taken a few transcriptions from that interview that I found illuminating. What we have, person that he mentions Ewan McCall, of course, and so many of these other source singers, Sam Lanier and all of them. But it's Bert Lloyd that he felt was the model for his own singing. And I'll get into that in a minute. This is really wonderful to find. These are transcriptions. This is Louis Killen on A.L. Lloyd, who with Ewan McCall were the driving force of the English revival in the 1950s and all those radio ballads, singing the fishing and all that. And they brought in the young Louis Killen to join them on Farewell Nancy and other recordings. So, yeah, okay, let's, yes, all right. So this is Louis speaking. This is Louis speaking in the interview about A.L. Lloyd. He was a major influence on his singing style. He's the one voice that is constantly in my head with a lot of the material. It's hard to say. He was an immense storyteller for me. Thank you, that's great. Good call there, my friend, Jesse. It's hard to say. He was an immense storyteller for me, full of little quirks and often a little bit off key. And sometimes I used to wonder if it was deliberately off key. He had immense knowledge about the music itself. He's still there all the time when I approach the songs. There's a little bit of inspiration there all the time. Bert Lloyd, very sweet. And then in the recording, if you listen to it, the BBC online, you'll hear Bert Lloyd singing "Rounding the Horn," good Chip Amphitrite. And then Louis says, I was just listening to his little changes in rhythm there. Like he's singing very steadily, going straight on. And then all of a sudden, these little touches that the words suited. That's the influence on me, his shifting. Hearing the words and shifting the rhythms round to make them fit. Isn't that beautiful? He was one of the curly singers. Now, the Brits know that there were curly singers and plain singers, but some of the Americans, I don't think, are that clear about it. But what's important here is that Louis is saying he's a curly singer, a marvelous, absolute singer in Bert Lloyd. And I have to say that myself, one of the first recordings that grabbed me many, many years ago was A.L. Lloyd singing the Ballina with all that curliness to it. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? I didn't call it curly. I didn't know what it was, but it grabbed me. And apparently, he was the model for the young Louis Killen. One last quote from Louis himself from that interview. My brother had a concertina, and I sold it after my brother died. Bought it back again after I heard Alf Edwards backing up Bert. He says, I wanted the thing, the concertina. I wanted the thing myself to back up the sea songs. And that just set me off in the concertina as an accompanying instrument. I was going to include more about the concertina, but I'm not a concertina player, although I know many concertina players. And but what I will say is this, the concertina accompaniment with Lou Killen never gets in the way of the singing and the story. He's not flamboyant. It supports what he's doing. And it's rubato. one of the things about Louis that's really interesting to me is that he's always at his best when he's in a freestyle, conversational, where he's not limited by somebody playing a mandolin or something else. What would happen is they'd sort of step on those little curls and those little shifts and those little things where he'd take a little more time. And so those recordings to me aren't as true to his particular gift, because usually what happens with players is they play in strict tempo, or very strong, close to strict tempo. And Louis would sing to that, of course, but he's always at his best when he accompanies himself on the concertina. It's not terribly fancy, but it is perfectly suited for what he's doing in his interpretation, at least in my opinion, David, as he would say. All right, time-wise here, we're about 25 minutes in. Let's see. So if I get another 5 minutes, Jesse, is that it? Only 5 minutes. Jerry Bryant and I were talking yesterday and crying in our beer over the fact that we have so much that we want to talk about, and we don't get to do it. All right, so what I'm going to do is share with you something really sweet. If I can lay my hands on it. This is from my daughter Kim, who is a shanty brat and accompanied me very often when I was working as a historic interpreter and shantyman at Mystic. She would always come along, and so she got to know everybody. And she wrote this April 26, 2020, a letter of gratitude to Louisa Jo Killen. She's no longer here to receive it, and so I share it generally instead. She put this out on Facebook. Dear Louisa Jo, I did not get to see you often over the years that we knew each other, but you were nevertheless a wonderful friend and mentor. As a child, I appreciated that world-famous folk singer who would sit down and talk with my dorky, she's not dorky, shy self, as if it was just as interesting as the accomplished adult musicians, writers, and scholars in the room. Later, you were my role model as I built my own traditional folk repertoire and discovered my own style. I studied your phrasing, and she did. An intense style of interpretation that resonated with me. I thank you for your advice and encouragement. When I was 16, you had a most profound effect upon my life, for which I am ever grateful. I was still dorky, she wasn't, and terribly shy, she was, and a perfectionist to boot. Oh yes, still so, I think. We can ask her husband. I was increasingly urged by established traditional singers to take up performing. They needed young people to carry on their music. Their exhortations were meant as loving encouragement, but I felt trapped by the feeling of responsibility. This is Louis, she's talking about. You asked me about my future plans. I'm sure you expected me to talk about college applications and considered majors. But my reply was that I knew I had talent, knowledge, and repertoire, but I couldn't make myself get up on stage, even though I knew I should. And then she says about Louis, your entire demeanor changed. You sat down, pulled your chair close to mine and said, you cannot live your life to please others. They want that for you. But it's not what you want. You will not be fulfilled. There's no joy in it. You need to make choices that are true to yourself. There are ways to carry the tradition besides performing. In that one conversation, you lifted a weight that had been threatening to crush me. Your words gave me permission to forgive myself for imperfections and to find another way forward. I find the songs for others who like performing. I sing mostly for myself, learning songs for the joy of knowing them. I find my way into the stage confidently when it pleases me to do so. I didn't know at the time that you were struggling to find your own way to merge your true self with your outer appearance, a journey that would take many years. I'm glad you lived by the advice you gave me that day, and I rejoice that you were surrounded by your family and friends who loved and supported you through all of it. Thank you for sharing yourself with all of us. Can't say it any better. My time is up. I'm ready for questions. And if anybody has a tie, I'll put it on, maybe. Oh, somebody has a question.
Dave, this is Dan Milne here at Action Central.
Hi, Dan.
Hiya.
Yes.
And what we're going to do now is ask if there are any questions from members of the audience. And we're going to ask them to come up to the podium here to ask their questions so that it gets onto the master tape of the festival here. So anyone who wants
I don't know the
please. Here you go. Now we have the first fella who's coming up here, you may know very well. He's Dick Holdstock. And Dick was a singer at the second festival. The mic's over here, pal.
Right, all right. I'll say it. Well, Dave, what I want to say is, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for giving me a talk like this about Louisa. I think it's very important that we, as a people, have come a long way to where we could enjoy that. Louis was born the same year I was. And it was in my backyard long before anybody else. But he told me that this was his intent. He really wanted to do it. I said, oh, don't do it. You can cover it up just during the weekend. But he finally did do it. And I think he would love to have heard your talk today. I'd love to have been here to see the people
Well, thank you, Dick.
reacted well to it. I bet that works for you.
Two more people? Anyone?
Thank you, Dick. My old friend.
Anyone for a question?
If I don't know the answer, I please challenge Vishnu.
Dave, I just wanted to say that was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate what you said about Louisa. I was fortunate with my partner Tony Barron to sing with Louis as she was then on a number of occasions. We had an occasional trio, and
wonderful. What a trio.
And I was also lucky enough to visit Louisa Joe in Gateshead in the late years of her life, and that was a wonderful visit as well. Louisa was a true inspiration. You have said wonderful things about her singing and her influences, and she was all that and more, and a wonderful person as well. And I thank you for bringing this up.
Well, we have her to thank for everything. Thank you, John.
Here's
Thank you.
Here's Deirdre Murtha from the Johnson Girls.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, Dave. I just wanted to.
Oh, Deirdre.
Hello. Yes, no, yes. Just wanted to mention something that you said made me think of is that Ginny Hawker once mentioned in a room full of people like this down in West Virginia, West by God, Virginia, at Augusta. And she said that style is what's between the notes. And when you were talking about how, he was so stylistic in his own way. You can't, if somebody were to ask him to teach that, you can't do that. It's really very unique. And you can't just pass that on to somebody. But I do remember also singing one night at the YTB with him and others, and there was a song that I was just learning, and I wasn't really sure, but yet he goes, no, sing it out. And I said, well, it's very long, and he goes, no, sing the whole thing, and just put your part into it. And he also said that there was a chorus part, and I said, well, I've been leaving out the chorus because the song is so no, sing the chorus. Everybody wants to sing along with you. You must sing it. So I appreciate your talk, because we all appreciate him so much, and we just remember him so well. So thank you. That's
great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Dan, can I, I don't know if can you hear me, Dan?